We have presenters and participants from everywhere around the world today also.
Good.
For example, my friend Song Li Feng is in a national holiday, a moon festival, and he left the festival and sit in the computer, sat in front of the computer to participate.
Yeah, normally
yes,
the day should be stay with family. And now I'm staying even bigger family together.
Yes, yes. Yes, of course. Hello, Greg, how are you?
Good morning, sir. I'm good.
Good morning, Greg. We are waiting a couple of more minutes. We have almost 100 now people connected.
So for the presenter panelists that are online right now, you're the only people who have the ability to have your microphone on. I have everyone's microphone opened up, and there are some of you who have self-muted. So unless you are going to be on the panel or are speaking, we're going to keep your microphones self-muted if we can. So for this first part this morning, I need Alex, Tony,
yes,
Greg McLean to make sure your microphones are muted, and if everyone else can go ahead and, or unmuted, I'm sorry, if everyone else can go ahead and mute their microphones in the meantime, except for Martha, since she'll be coming on quite quickly. That'll get us started to where we can move forward fairly quickly as the rest of the attendees come online.
Well, I think that is time to start today, no? Hello all, welcome. I am Alex Cunningham, the president of the Pine Chemical Association, and happy to have you here. It is a pity that we need to do it this way, but that's the situation today that our world is navigating, and it was going to be great to be sitting in Dublin face to face, but well, we have 170 people registered for this virtual conference, the first formal one for PCA. And without going deeper into the presentations, I'm going to ask Tony, please, to give the antitrust statement. Tony.
Thank you, Alex. You know, I feel somewhat like one of those airline flight attendants who gets up on the screen and gives you the safety reminder before you take the trip. It's a first-time experience, basically, talking to you all in terms of antitrust on the wide screen, so to speak, but the principles remain the same. And you all know what they are because I've told you these things many times. You cannot discuss any prices. You cannot discuss future projections. We will not be discussing any division of markets or customers or territories, sales territories during the course of this meeting. And we will, of course, not be reaching any agreements among each other to cut any other competitor out of competition. I will be listening in throughout the presentations. If there is anything that I do not like the sound of, I will pipe up. You will hear from me, and I hope you do not hear from me. I will also be reviewing, as some of you may or may not know, I'll be reviewing any questions that come in with respect to any of the presentations, all of which I have already reviewed. So with that, please note that there is an antitrust policy written on your screen. There's a slide to that effect. please notice it. Please understand that while this is an international meeting, many of the same principles apply to each of your countries or countries in which you do business. So while we may call it antitrust in the United States, the word competition is probably a better term, and we are here to try to protect competition and enable everybody to compete fairly in the marketplace. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you, Tony. As Tony was saying, this is international. In fact, I am sitting in São Paulo, Brazil, in the meeting room of Grupo Resinas Brasil, who I thank for the for using this location to organize this virtual conference. Amanda and Wendy are sitting in our offices in Fernandina Beach, Florida. And then, well, Greg McLean is our new chairman of the board, and I'm going to ask him if he can give some words as an introduction to this virtual conference. Greg, please.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the call. Just would like to echo some of Alex's words in welcoming everybody here today. This is certainly a unique challenge and unique experience for everybody in Pine Chemicals. I know from my experience of over 20 years of PCA that we've certainly never had a conference or a call or a gathering like this. So always exciting to kind of learn and see something new. And so hopefully this goes well today. I think the number one statement for everybody on the call today is we hope everybody is safe and healthy. It's certainly been a challenging year, and you know, our safety and our health is the number one priority. So certainly PCA had to reconstruct, I guess you could say, the agenda for this year. We unfortunately were not able to have our spring meeting, and as most of you know, the majority of us would probably be in Dublin, Ireland right now, either finishing up the conference or maybe enjoying some time off and enjoying the country. So it's certainly been a challenging year, and I guess all I can say is we're looking forward to football season, which got started here in the United States, and getting back to normal hopefully soon for everybody. As Alex said, you know, this is encouraging. You know, we've got 160 to 170 people that signed up for the course or for the conference. And I know some people are going to jump in and jump out, you know, depending on topics and their timing and schedules. So that's encouraging that we get not as many people as we normally would at an international, but certainly a very good, well-rounded participation from our industry. I just find that encouraging, and I hope that bodes well for things getting back to normal next year. And we are going to have our meetings, in the annual meeting in Florida and the international meeting in Dublin. So we hope everything goes according to plan there. A couple of things just from a housekeeping standpoint from the PCA board. You know, earlier this year when we saw the meetings were going to be not happening, I think the PCA board encouraged Alex to figure out, you know, how do we do something for the PCA members to get some presence in front of them, get some updates out to the group. And Hunter Harris and Alex, I think, began working on that earlier this year. And so unplanned, we had some news from Hunter Harris. He was a fortunate one that he was able to retire early. And thus Hunter had to relinquish the chairman of the board for PCA. So that's how I ended up rolling into this position a little earlier than planned. And so it looks to be good for Hunter. Congratulate him on retiring early and wish him well. And we appreciate his services over the years. And I think Hunter is still going to be involved with Ingevity. So we look forward to keeping Hunter around. So I landed in this shoes. And as I joked with Alex, I said, sometimes I'd rather be lucky than good. This is a year where we just need a little bit of luck and we get through this COVID and get back to normal. So welcome everybody. I would encourage everybody, all the members, all the participants, if you have any ideas or suggestions for future papers, projects, or anything that the PCA can support you with, please get in touch with Alex or Amanda or Wendy, myself, anybody on the board. We're always looking for ideas and suggestions and ways that we can try and get the PCA positioned to benefit the members. That's probably the single biggest thing we always need help with is finding the right topics that will benefit the members. So we encourage everybody, stay in touch with PCA. We're looking forward to next year hopefully being back to normal. I believe we'll go over some more details later, but we are planning to have the annual meeting April 21st through 23rd down in Palm Beach, Florida. And then, of course, we're still shooting for our international meeting next year in Dublin, September 19th through 21st. So in the interim, short of meeting in person and shaking hands and seeing everybody, we're going to try this video conference and hopefully everything goes well. I know Wendy and Amanda have put a lot of effort into getting this set up. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alex. He's going to go over a few housekeeping items, introduce our first speaker, and certainly wish everybody well for the remainder of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Well, as Greg was telling you guys, this is the first time that we are doing a conference in a virtual mode. So we have, in one side, we have the attendees that can reach us through questions, and in the other group, we have the organizers and presenters. Today we have 4 sessions, and the presenters of each session are going to be unmuted, and all other guys muted for the time of the session. Amanda, can you show us the other slide, please?
Certainly.
Follow.
So as part of that, I do have a slide on the screen to send questions to us. So by all means, please send your questions to us. We'd love to have them ready for the panelists. So a couple things. Greg did mention some of our conferences. So yes, we are working to develop the conference program and some of the details for the 2021. As part of that, we are working on a safe and clean plan and continue to work with the hotel industry and the meetings industry to implement healthy practices so that we can still have fun. We do have indoor events, but we're going to make sure that we're promoting the best environment and conducive for that. We will be having the spring meeting that Greg mentioned in Palm Beach Gardens. That's still set for now, so you'll see some additional information coming out after the conference and probably a few special promo codes to go ahead and get some registrations started. We do have everything set for Dublin. Thankfully, we were able to keep Guinness as our final night dinner venue, so we're very excited about that. And we are still looking forward to Dublin. You'll also receive some information about the international conference so you can start planning. For those of you who do want to be socially responsible, we do have some extra meeting rooms that will be booked at this venue to allow for private meetings. So we have 18 private meeting rooms so that you can ensure that your staff is self-contained and you have a designated spot to host your meetings. So if you'd like information about that, we're more than happy to get you signed up or send information over. So here's our current condition with Dublin. As I said, we continue to monitor this every single week. Right now, Ireland as a whole is at a level 2, Dublin's at a level 3. That's in essence what they send to us as we're working with their tourism department and their government officials so that we can proceed forward. So just know that all of our conferences that we are looking at for 2021 are taking into account all of our current conditions and hoping that those conditions slightly diminish so that we can proceed forward with business as usual in person. So with that, we're still looking for a fun program. With that, nothing's changed with the PCA. We will be hosting some additional virtual conferences in the coming months and next year. So we're developing that program now to send out some information so you can start to save the date.
Amanda, can you go back a couple of slides and show the slide about how to post questions?
Certainly. There you go.
Yes. And if you want to explain this, because you are the one that wrote this procedure.
Yes, with the help of my trusty sidekick, Wendy. So, yes, for those of you who would like to submit questions, everyone has a GoToMeeting dashboard. That's what this is called, a GoToMeeting dashboard. With that, you should see a box that says questions, and you should be able to type the information in and just hit send. When you send that, all of the organizers and staff can see that information so that we can forward it to the attorney if appropriate, and then get it over to the panelists so that as part of our question and answer period at the end of each hour of sessions and presentations, we'll have that ready for your panelists to answer on screen.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. And well, now we are ready to start session one with one presentation. This is Martha Moore. Martha, she's the Senior Director of Economic and Policy Analysis at ACC. She has been a presenter in the last couple of years, a regular presenter in the last couple of years, always enlightening us of what is going on with the global economy, the chemical industry, end-use market. So last time she presented in April, and now she's bringing us an update of that presentation in this very particular year. So Martha, thank you very much again, and this is yours.
Great. Alex, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm of course very sad that we're not all in Dublin, but I'm very glad to have the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. As I mentioned to Tony and Alex earlier on, I have made a few changes to the slides. I've sent my updated slide deck to Amanda, who will distribute it. There were a couple of reports that came out this morning that I wanted to include, and some more recent data. But ACC does for those of you that are members, we do twice a year, we do an outlook, usually in the spring, and another one in December. This year, of course, with all of the uncertainty, all of the economic ups and downs that have happened as the result of the pandemic, we've done actually several interim 2020 situation and outlooks. And so we have just updated our forecast as of about 2 weeks ago. So you all are some of the first folks to see this. So I'll be presenting about the global economy, the US economy, end-use markets, and then finishing up with our chemicals outlook. So since we last spoke, I guess in April, May timeframe, we've had, a lot of changes since then. I think at that point, we were still accelerating into the downturn. We are now well into the recovery. There's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty as the virus continues to spread. It is resurging in certain places. In the United States, rates have come down. But in other parts of the world, they're accelerating. In parts of Europe, they're actually starting to come up again. So this is a very concerning and unpredictable pattern, the way this virus is wreaking havoc on the global economy. There are upside risks, of course. There are 6, I believe, vaccine teams that are in phase 3 trials of a vaccine. So there's a lot of positive momentum going into this. The world is throwing everything they have at this problem. So there's been a lot of momentum in getting a vaccine. However, early anticipation for a vaccine by the end of the year, I think most folks are thinking it's going to take a little bit longer. So our forecast for 2020 generally is a little bit better than expected, but our forecast for 2021 we have downgraded since I think we spoke last in April. And that's because the longer it takes to get a vaccine, the longer the social distancing, the more restrictions are in place, and the economic downturn associated with those activities. So our forecast, we have a baseline forecast, which is what I'll talk about most today. I've got a couple of slides. We explored a pessimistic case where we look at, the reopening that is hampered by continued restrictions. We've also looked at an optimistic case where maybe there's a fast track vaccine or some therapeutics that are really making a difference in how the virus spreads and the economic activity that is associated with that. So just a recap really quickly, and I updated this morning. These are the 7-day moving average trend rates in daily cases. So you can see the black line is the global, and the global actually just ticked above 300 for the first time yesterday. So global cases are continuing to accelerate. India is one of those countries that is really having trouble controlling this virus. They continue to have very, very high rates in addition to many other countries. The US, the rates, we had a big surge in the summer. That has since come down, and we're sort of stabilizing just under 45,000 rates per day, new cases per day. There are certain parts of the country that are continuing to see higher rates, and other parts of the country. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and our rates are actually starting to come down, which is encouraging for this part of the country. But going into our global economic outlook, we're still looking, this is the worst recession since the global depression. We're looking for global economic output to contract by 4.6% this year, and recover really only partially next year. And this is a bit of an improvement from previous estimates. We see employment growth lagging in many parts of the world as the stimulus in many of the advanced economies, and in China, there's been just massive amounts of stimulus thrown at this. Some of that stimulus impact is starting to fade, and there's a question about whether households and businesses are going to be able to sort of stand on their own 2 feet after the stimulus fades. But our core forecast is for 5.3% growth in 2021, and that follows a 4.6% decline this year. Global trade has absolutely collapsed. I mean, this we saw beginning back in January, February timeframe when the virus was emerging in China. I think our trade, the decline in trade has improved. We're now looking for a 12.6% decline in global trade volumes in 2020. I think we were predicting 15% back in our mid-year situation and outlook. So we think that there is some improvement there. And the contraction, of course, is heaviest on the export-oriented sectors in those economies that are big exporters. We see a 12% rebound in 2021. Industrial production, global industrial production is expected to contract 5.9% before improving in 2021. So in second quarter, we saw a historic collapse in global GDP. Third quarter, which is just ended yesterday, as a matter of fact, mechanical recovery. So we have stopped falling. The acceleration in the fall has stopped, and we are just about every economy in the world is in recovery, in technical recovery. That doesn't mean that we're back to where we were, but we're not falling anymore, is what a recovery means in an economic cycle perspective. We don't expect industrial production to return to its pre-COVID levels on a global basis till the second quarter of 2021. There's a number of reasons for this. This has been a really interesting, from a technical perspective, an interesting downturn. In many downturns, you see a contraction in goods consumption and goods production. This contraction, this very, very sharp, unprecedented contraction, it's been services, mostly in the services. Certainly goods have been affected to a large degree, but it's social distancing, all of the hospitality, all of the travel and tourism. I think it's the World Tourism Council came out with a statistic that about 10% of the contribution to global GDP is from travel and tourism, and that has largely disappeared from the world economy. versus other industries, for example, food and beverage, which is largely inelastic. There have been declines in food and beverage, certainly in the U.S., which I'll go into more detail. Our forecast for end use markets is more granular at the U.S. level. Certainly people continue to eat and drink, but they don't do it necessarily at restaurants or at conferences. So there's been a slower decline there. In the advanced economies, we've had large fiscal and monetary response, which has mitigated the downturn. But looking ahead, households and businesses remain very cautious, and banks are tightening their credit standards. This could be headwinds for lower consumer spending and lower business investment in advanced economies going forward. So quickly going around the world, in Europe and the UK, summer tourism brought a resurgence of cases, especially in Spain and France. And the UK in particular has been the hardest hit of all the European nations. EU exports have been impacted by a higher euro, which has risen quite sharply against the dollar in recent months. A number of reasons for that: differentials in interest rates, expectations for COVID. At one point, Europe was looking quite a bit better than the United States. I think that situation may be changing. There's a lot of uncertainty around the US election, and all of these have led to a higher euro. Eurozone inflation actually fell into negative territory for the first time in 4 years in August. It was mostly due to lower energy prices, but it's still going to put some pressure on the ECB in terms of their interest rate policy. What we're seeing in Europe and also in other parts of the world is sort of increasing populist sentiment. We see with the Brexit debate, anti-immigrant sentiment, and this is not particular to Europe. This is happening in many other parts of the world, but it's being driven in part by the pandemic and the stresses that are being encountered because of the pandemic. We don't expect Eurozone GDP to return to its pre-crisis level till about 2022. And in the UK, Brexit is weighing heavily on the minds of everyone. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty regarding Brexit. They have until the end of the year to finalize a trade agreement. There are still many unresolved issues regarding access to the single market, fishing rights, and the border with Ireland. And they really need to get an agreement in place to make a very disruptive year less disruptive than it needs to be. I'll talk about the US in detail, but the rest of North America, Canada, they had a very strong third quarter in Canada, but the recovery is quite fragile looking beyond that. And that's true of many of the advanced economies that I'm going to talk about. Provincial governments in Ontario and Quebec have tightened containment measures. There have been a resurgence in cases in those parts. So they're seeing a retightening of their economies, and there will be some economic consequences to that. In Mexico, as you may remember, had a surge in cases. Their case rates have declined, but are still relatively high. It's been a relatively slow reopening of their services sector, and GDP and production in Mexico are constrained as a result. Japan, we think is one of the more fragile of the advanced economies. You'll remember they had a consumption tax hike at the end of 2019 that sort of curtailed a consumption going into 2020. And then we had the pandemic on top of that, and that leaves the Japanese economy, more vulnerable, I think, than others to further setbacks, especially in those important trading partner economies. And of course, Shinzo Abe has announced his departure, and there's a search for a successor. I think that has not yet been announced, although I think the expectations are that whoever succeeds President Abe will continue in his footsteps on same policy path. Looking now to Brazil, where Alex is, they had a more relaxed approach to social distancing, and as a result, their cases were quite a bit higher. For a long time, they were I think the second highest country in the world in terms of cases. India is now number 2. But Brazil, because of their more relaxed approach to social distancing, the Brazilian economy has actually performed the best in the Latin American part of the world. That said, they're still looking at sharp declines. Just about every economy except China is looking for a sharp decline in global GDP for 2020. But Brazil will be less negative than its peers in the region. In Brazil, we saw a really quick return of consumer spending. There was a Corona voucher stimulus program, which was very successful in stimulating consumer spending. But looking ahead, there are some concerns that President Bolsonaro may not stick to his spending caps. I think I talked about some of the economic reforms that are going on in Brazil, and there's some concern that Bolsonaro his government may not stick to that spending cap, and that could lay the foundation for another debt crisis like we had in 2015. India, cases are still rising. They've had a very strict lockdown. They had limited fiscal stimulus. We're looking for GDP decline, I think, of over 10% this year. The lockdowns have been stringent. They've been sporadic, coming and going in various parts of the country. There was a sharp pullback in consumer spending that really hasn't recovered just yet. Industrial production and investment have also declined considerably in India, more so than some of its other peers. They continue to work on economic reforms, labor reforms, and important reforms to the agriculture sector. So long term, I think India's got good prospects to return to. For a long time, they were the fastest rising major economy in the world, and I think they're laying the foundation to continue on that path. China is the only country that we expect to have positive major economy to have positive GDP growth in 2020. The recovery there is gaining strength. Production measures, PMI, the manufacturing sector all continue to increase. Household spending has not quite recovered. Retail sales in China were still down on a year-over-year basis. They're coming along. Yeah?
I'm so sorry, but just to make sure that everyone is seeing it, we're only seeing the around the world slide. Are your slides advancing?
Yeah, I do have more slides. I put together the country details sort of at a later time, so I didn't include slides on these. I'll move forward to more charts in just a minute.
We had a couple questions coming in, so I did not want to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't having a technical glitch. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, no. Yeah, everything's good. I'll finish up my around the world spiel.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't losing connection somewhere. Thank you.
Okay. So China, Chinese economy is rebounding. They've got a holiday coming up. This next week, I believe, is a week of holiday, and that they're expecting to see some rebound in consumer spending related to the holiday. Russia, again, sharp downturn. Consumer spending is rebounding in Russia. But there have been mandatory oil cuts as part of the OPEC Plus agreement, and that is hurting their economy in addition to weak industrial activity. All right, so now back to the slides. So these are the GDP expectations for the major economies, most of which I talked about. And I guess, rather than looking at all of the details, the numbers, the pattern is, that the light blue bar is 2020, and we're seeing negative GDP growth, significantly negative GDP growth in every major economy with the exception of China. We're expecting a 2.3% growth this year in China as they have rebounded sharply. They came out of it first. They've been able to keep their case rates down, so they're pumping along. But you look to 2021, the gray bar, and we're going to see a rebound. Not everybody gets back to their pre-COVID level in 2021, but they're certainly on the move that way. So this is global manufacturing. I think I've shown this chart to you all several times. So back, I think in April and May, when we looked at this chart, these were all red lines. So let me back up. The way to read this chart is a reading above 50 indicates that the manufacturing sector is expanding in that economy. A reading below 50 indicates that it's contracting. When I presented this chart the last time we spoke, all of these lines were red. Every single economy, manufacturing sector in the world was in contraction. We have rebounded significantly since then. Just this morning, so October, the very first of the month is when these indices are released. With the exception of Korea, I was able to update all of the PMIs for September that have come out in the eastern part of the world. The Western Hemisphere, just due to the time change, those numbers usually get released around 10 o'clock Eastern time in the US, at least for the US. But you can see Japan, South Korea. South Korea was still in contraction in August. I haven't seen the September number yet, but it'll be out this morning, I expect. Russia contracted, and Russia had expanded back in August, but they contracted this most recent month. But again, everybody else, most major economies are seeing a rebound in manufacturing. So now turning to the US outlook. Again, I'm not going to go through all the details of this, but just to appreciate the magnitude of the decline that we saw in 2020. It was more than a third of the economy on a seasonally adjusted annual basis. If we had more time, I could go into how different economies measure their GDP. The US is sort of an outlier. We measure GDP on an annualized basis, which when you're in situations like this, a pandemic, it seems not productive to measure it this way, but that's how our economy does it. Almost if these declines continued on an annual basis, it would be a third, a decline of a third in US GDP. The third quarter ended last night. We expect a sharp rebound in third quarter GDP, but there's some question about how durable that rebound will be. This chart is some interesting research. This is the Dallas Fed. They've got this mobility and engagement index, and it uses cell phone location data to look at where people are going relative to their patterns back before the pandemic. And you can see that there's, the nadir of the mobility back in early to mid-April, and we've come back considerably since then. But if you look at that pre-COVID level, there's still a long way to go. I mean, many of us are dialing into this from home. We're not traveling to work. We're not taking our cell phones to the office. We may not be doing as much shopping or traveling as far to do shopping or some of the other activities that we would normally do. So this is an indicator that that service spending, that service sector, part of the economy has a way to go. And this is ACC's Chemical Activity Barometer. I've shown this to you all several times. It's some interesting piece of research that Kevin Swift put together a number of years ago. It looks at changes in the chemical industry as an indicator of broader changes in the economy because of the chemical industry's position in the supply chain. The CAB rose 0.7% in September. It is still off on a year-to-year basis, but the CAB reading is still consistent with a continued recovery in U.S. commerce. So this continues to be good news. This has been on the rise, and we've seen improvements in many production related indicators, performance chemistry in particular. Export markets continue to be mixed, but other inventory and other indicators were positive. So we're seeing some positive developments in this measure. So we put together starting with COVID, we started putting together this sort of weekly tracking of the economy for our senior management at ACC. And this is sort of a Reader's Digest of some of the indicators that we were looking at during the pandemic that sort of indicated sort of the instability in the global economy, the magnitude of some of the downturns. You see, we have the CEX is the chemicals, the S&P 500, the S&P chemicals index. It's an equity market index for chemical manufacturing firms. The S&P 500 index, which are up on a year-to-date basis. I mentioned the strength of the euro, but conversely, there's the broad trade-weighted dollar index. So this is produced by the Federal Reserve, and it's a broader basket of currencies, especially emerging market currencies, are represented in this index, and it shows that the dollar remains strong against these emerging market currencies, which of course is troublesome in that many countries have debts. Many emerging countries have debts that are denominated in dollars, and so that makes it harder. It increases the burden on debt repayment in emerging markets when the dollar is stronger. And these are just some energy and commodity prices. Again, just keeping track of how these commodities are moving. All historic data, of course. Copper prices have actually started to come back up in recent weeks, and that is encouraging the Chinese economy. China actually consumes about half of the world's copper, and that reflects the Chinese economy starting to come back online in a bigger way. So our macro outlook, we see the recovery underway. Very, very sharp decline between February and April, May. They haven't called it yet, but I suspect that the bottom will be May, June timeframe, and we're in that recovery at this point. And looking back, this is the third worst peak to trough downturn that we've had since the Great Depression was the worst, followed by there was a deep recession at the end of World War II when the U.S. economy was demobilizing. And this is the third worst in terms of the contraction, the magnitude of the contraction. So very, very sharp downturn. We've had a lot of federal stimulus, which has helped keep the consumer spending afloat. We are looking for GDP to fall for 4.6%, same as the global. It's just a coincidence. And we see a rebound of 3.7% in 2021. Consumer spending has declined. Again, that's led by services. The goods spending has recovered. It's still down on a year-over-year basis, I believe. But the services spending is just starting to recover as people are getting out and doing and consuming more services. Services is a really large part of consumer spending. Business investment was already down prior to COVID-19, as many of you in your companies have probably seen either anecdotally or on a personal level. Investment plans have been delayed as a result of COVID around the world. In the US, we're looking for a decline of 6.3% in 2020 before a very anemic rebound in 2021. And again, that gets to what I opened with, which is the continuation of social distancing and the delay in economic activity returning to normal around the world. The labor market, we continue to see steady improvement. We're going to get a jobs report, I believe, tomorrow. Between February and April, the US economy lost 22 million jobs. As of August, they had only regained 10.6 of those. So there's a long way to go. There's still close to 1 million people, excuse me, still close to 1 million people receiving unemployment benefits in the United States. So we see a slow and steady improvement in unemployment. So looking at the end-use sectors, vehicle sales in the US, we're looking for a sharp contraction from 16.9 last year to 14.1 this year, and then a steady improvement throughout the forecast horizon. Housing, though, has been one of those sort of shining stars in an otherwise very bleak economic outlook. There's been a lot of interesting things happening in the housing sector, and we're looking for housing starts to actually increase slightly in 2021. There's been a lot because of remote work and remote learning. Patterns of where people want to live have changed dramatically. You've got a lot of folks in urban centers that are now moving out to the suburbs or moving to different geographic regions for whatever reason. you've got record low mortgage rates below 3%. So it's very relatively inexpensive to finance a house in the United States compared to even recent history when interest rates have been very low. So there's a lot of momentum in housing right now. Another important end-use market for chemistry versus the medical sector, disinfectants and cleaning supplies, test kits, medical plastics, PPE, et cetera. A lot of chemistry goes into the response to COVID. For those of you that are in the oil and gas industry, they're selling to the oil and gas industry, just complete collapse in drilling activity. I think it has actually come up. I think the low point was combined rig count of 251 several weeks ago. I think it's up to 253, 255, something like that. It's starting to recover, but it's going to be very slow. And this, of course, is because people haven't been driving and petroleum consumption has collapsed around the world. In the US, expectations for gasoline consumption, we're expecting to have 90% of our 219 level gasoline consumption by the end of the year. So the best case scenario is that we get back to a 10% deficit in gasoline consumption by the end of the year. And that's, of course, wreaked havoc on inventories and drilling activity and production activity. This is the Energy Information Administration, their short-term outlook. They're looking for continued decline in natural gas production before a rebound at the beginning of 2021. I think a slightly more, I think the turnaround is fourth quarter in oil production. But yeah, sharp declines before we see an improvement. So this is the heat map that I like to show you all. So in the US, we're looking for industrial production falling by 7.6% this year before growing by 4.1% next year. And so the way that this chart is organized, it's showing from highest to lowest the expectations for 2020 growth in the industry. So at the top, we've got semiconductors and computers. As people have moved to remote work and remote learning, there's been a huge investment in tech gear and infrastructure related to tech, and that's why we see those gains there. Food, beverages, and tobacco, a slight decline, but again, relatively inelastic demand for that. We see structural panels and appliances doing less negative than some of the other manufacturing sectors that we cover. And that, of course, is tied to housing. People are moving and building houses. Oil and gas extraction is the next. I know that there was some discussion about paper at the last time we spoke. Still looking for a 5.1% decline in paper production in 2020. There's certainly been an increase in paper board production related to online shopping and shipping of packages and boxes, but paper like office paper, all of the paper consumption that happens when you're out and about in commerce, that has offset the gain in things like paper towels and toilet paper and shipping boxes. So within all of these industries, there's some offsets. Where they finally land is we'll see shortly. And of course, down at the bottom, we see iron and steel, motor vehicles and parts. US automakers were shut down for about 2 months. Completely shut down. So that sector has a long climb ahead of it. But we see a sharp rebound, of course, in 2021. So I mentioned at the beginning, we do a pessimistic and an optimistic case. And I also presented our forecast, what we were expecting at the end of last year when we did our December 2019 situation and outlook. So, obviously a very different picture because of COVID, the pandemic, and the downturn that we've seen as a result. Our core forecast, the baseline forecast that I've presented, is in the light blue. Our pessimistic case is of course slightly worse. Business investment we think could fall by as much as 9.2%. If there's a resurgence that causes extended lockdowns in the United States or in large parts of the United States. On the other hand, if we see a quick turnaround in a vaccine development and deployment, so it's not just the development of the vaccine, you've got to get it to people and you've got to get it to enough people that you have herd immunity. And that's, I think everybody's coming to the realization that that's going to take a little bit longer than we had initially anticipated. But if that does happen quickly, the gray bar is sort of the anticipation of what that might look like if we had a sharp rebound in the last quarter of 2020. So quickly, our chemistry outlook. We're looking for total chemistry output to be down 3.7%. But remember, I said overall industrial production was going to be down 7.6%. So this is another example of one of those industries that, there's been sharp downturns in certain segments, especially those tied to durable goods, which has been offset by better performance in certain materials related to cleaning products and disinfectants, plastics in particular. So if we look at the sort of disaggregated forecast, the plastic resin sector is the only segment in the chemistry and our chemistry outlook that is actually going to show growth in 2020. That's partially a result of higher exports. Last year was a difficult export situation because of the trade war with China, but also because of things like plastic barriers and PPE and food packaging. So you had, huge amounts of food that were destined for the restaurant industry, and all of a sudden they had to package it for retail and grocery stores, the takeout and all of that. So there's been an increase in demand for plastic resins. Our basic chemicals forecast, we're looking for a 2.2% decline in 2020. Specialty chemicals has had a much larger hit. We're looking for a 10.8% decline in specialty chemicals. I believe it's disaggregated. It's 9.4% decline in coatings and 11.5% decline in other specialty chemicals, so adhesives and some of the other things. And looking out, we see a rebound in 2021 and 2022 as those markets improve. And since many of you all sell into the specialty chemicals market, this is historic data. ACC has a specialty chemicals market index where we look at the sort of the market demand the market demand for these various market segments and functional segments. Overall specialties market volume demand, we think we're down 9.3% year over year, but there were two sequential gains before that. Year to date, it's off 7.9%. But within that, adhesives and sealants rather, we see a good gain in July, a slightly softer gain in August. It's starting to make up for the declines. And these will be in the slide pack that Amanda distributes. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. And this is our sort of optimistic and pessimistic look at chemicals output, chemical volumes, shipments, and capital spending, depending on the various scenarios that are there. Basic chemicals, we think could fall as much as 3.5% or have a decline of 1.1% in our optimistic case. Specialty volumes could decline even further, but we think if there's a sharper rebound, that the decline would only be 8.5%. So at the end of the day, there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. We're really waiting to hear what happens with a vaccine, when that gets developed, when it gets finalized, when it gets distributed. Will people take it? When will we get herd immunity? When can things go back to normal? So there's a number of different trajectories that could take, and it's really hard as an economic forecaster trying to build that into a forecast. it really hinges on when things can go back to normal and what that normal is going to look like, because you've had supply chains being disrupted, although there's been a tremendous amount of improvement in that. But just the way people do business, the way people are working, there may be some long-term structural changes related to that. Spending on services, on travel, there may be some long-term impact there. The global economy, we think, bottomed out sometime in the end of the second quarter, possibly the beginning of the third quarter. The recovery is uneven in different parts of the world. COVID is proving very, very difficult to contain. You think you've got it tamped down in some place like perhaps France or Spain, and then you open those economies up to summer tourism, and the rates are skyrocketing. We're getting ready to go into the colder weather here in the Northern Hemisphere. And there's already some indication that could lead to increasing rates as people move indoors. I live in a part of the United States where we've been able to enjoy some socially distant activities outside, but that's going to change when the weather gets colder. And so that, we may see resurgence of restrictions related to rising case rates just as the weather changes. And this is the pattern that happened in the 1918 pandemic flu pandemic. So our expectations for 2020 have been revised upwards. The U.S. economy in particular has proven to be more resilient than we thought when we were looking at this back in June. But our expectations for 2021 have really deteriorated in most parts of the world as we think social distancing and the economic activity associated with that will continue to be depressed going into 2021. And with that, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Martha, thank you. This presentation is something to look and analyze in more detail. And we have a question here from Nathan Childs from Westrock. And the question is, what long-term effect will the increased global debt levels have as a result of the fiscal stimulus?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and ones that many folks are looking into. When debt levels get to a certain level, it's a certain percentage of GDP, it really weighs heavily on an economy's ability to grow. And so there is some concern, certainly in the United States and other parts of the world, that the massive stimulus will lead to slower growth going forward. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. There's some other theories that suggest a different track. Modern monetary theory, which is not something I personally subscribe to, suggests that you can continue to deficit spend in perpetuity and keep economies afloat that way. But yeah, I think going forward, we're looking at slower growth because of the debt levels that are incurred.
Mm-hmm. Well, Martha, once more, thank you very, very much for your presentation. We are finishing this first session just on time, to start our second session, at 10 a.m. So, Martha, thank you again, and we hope to have you soon with better news. Okay?
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, section 2 is going to be dedicated basically to pine chemicals. We have here 4 presenters: Michelle Bonmassy, Steve Williams, Song Li Fen, and Ricardo Lacerda Suarez. Well, without further ado, let me introduce Michelle Bonmassy. He's a regular presenter of the Pine Chemical Association's spring meeting and international conference. And he has been keeping us updated with the global pine chemicals industry situation for some years already, Michelle, please.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Hello?
Yes.
Ah, yes. Yes, now let's have a look at the presentation work. Ah, yes.
Oh,
So,
very good.
yes, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are seated. And as far as I can remember, since many years, it's the first time we are not able to attend physically the PCA International Conference. So let's go virtual and waiting for a better situation next year. First of all, let's have a look at the propagation of the virus, which is directly affecting the recovery of our pine chemical industry. In the previous presentation, Marsa has shown a very good picture of the situation. In most of Asia and Europe, COVID-19 reached a peak and then sharply declined, while in USA, South America, and India, the number of COVID-19 confirmed cases is still remaining at a very high level. COVID-19 has caused a global slowdown of the world economy, creating a huge debt that probably we'll have to pay one day, resulting in a lower demand for pine chemicals. The demand for rosin derivatives collapsed, while the crude alloy production remained at relatively steady level. But crude alloy fractionators slowed down or shut down refineries, and the demand for biofuels declined. So CTO became long, and the talloy rosin market really depressed. Now some maintenance stops at some pulp mills in USA and Europe are scheduled this autumn, and pulp mills in USA are starting to reduce production. So perhaps we'll have a better balance between supply and demand. Let's now have a look at the TOFA production this year, 410,000 tons, which is 50,000 tons down compared to last year. First, the crude oil prices were collapsed with lowest value in April. For instance, if we have a look at the WTI index, went negative during a few days, where sellers were obliged to pay buyers to get rid of material. Now the oil prices have recovered, but they are still much lower than before the pandemic. As a result, the demand of talloy derivatives for oil field declined sharply in USA. Also, we saw lower TOFA demand from coatings and other end uses. TOFA is still long in USA. Actually, when I wrote this, it was before Hurricane Laura hit southeast US. And caused the closure of during about 2 weeks of some CTO refineries. Supply is becoming tight in Europe with lower production levels and demand picking up from every field, including coatings and biofuels. Turpentine production, 325,000 tons, which is 20,000 tons less than last year, while the general demand remained at a very steady level. Of course, high demand for disinfectants. Inventories are declining, and supply might become even tighter. The global rosin production, 1.15 million of tons, which is 120,000 tons lower than last year, unfortunately, so opening opportunities for hydrocarbon resins. Gum rosin production declined mainly in China, only 350,000 tons this year, which is compared to 400,000 tons last year. We saw also lower tyrosine production due to fractionation plants operating at lower rates. The demand for rosin derivatives for adhesive and inks are now getting back to normal level in Europe. But we have to pay attention to hydrocarbon resins, which are competitively priced. Now, an outlook for the pine chemical market. After COVID-19, the demand is improving quickly in Asia and Europe, and hopefully soon in the USA and South America, India. The pine-derived chemical market is reaching $5 billion and will go on increasing at higher rate than the average GDP growth. Pine-derived chemicals have a low carbon footprint, and the demand for natural products from sustainable origin will remain at high levels. And of course, the growing environmental concerns will favor the pine chemicals. So the pine chemical market has proven its resilience and capability to overcome crises. So as a conclusion, let's be optimistic and keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. And we are going to leave the questions for the final, after we have the other three presenters. Okay?
Okay.
Steve Williams from Argus is going to present now. Argus has been a regular also presenter to this to our international conference, and this is the first time for Steve. He's the Vice President of C5 monomers and polymers for Argus. Please, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody here. And just want to thank PCA for the opportunity to speak for the first time for me. I'm going to try and give you an update today, basically with the competing product, I guess I'd call it, what's happening in terms of hydrocarbon resin production and growth trends. So there's a fair amount to update. The obligatory notice slide just from Argus, which you can peruse at your convenience later. Agenda, just I wanted to spend a minute or two on just monomer supply fundamentals, really feedstock and what drives feedstock. For some of you, that might be a little bit of review, and then kind of focus on what's happening with production capacities, dynamics, and a little bit on market structure in terms of number of players, consolidation, etc. So I think, as most people are aware, what drives the supply of feedstock for the hydrocarbon resin, tackifying resin business is really what is going on with ethylene. And there's a couple of things of note, really. One, what sort of operating rates are we seeing? And secondly, what sort of feedstock are ethylene producers using to make ethylene? So, it makes a big difference as to what sort of feedstock that you're running, as to how many resin-forming molecules you will produce. So really, the story is that the tackifier resin feeds, be it C5, C9, are produced in much larger quantities when you're cracking naphtha or gas oil, what we'd refer to as heavy feedstocks. And you can see on the graphic, the C5 components are coming out of the crude C5 stream. That's part of the ethylene production, be it DCPD, piperines, and we show isoprene on the slide as well, because while what rates ethylene plants are running and what feedstock they're using dictates, how much in the way of crude C5s are produced, how much are extracted into the various component parts is generally a function of what demand looks like for isoprene. So if you're producing isoprene, you will generally make CPD and DCPD along the way. You'll make piperines along the way as well. And this just kind of puts in perspective kind of a little bit of price history, natural rubber versus isoprene. high natural rubber prices tend to drive isoprene prices higher. Polyisoprene rubber is a substitute for natural rubber. So to some extent, I guess they compete, obviously, with natural rubber consumption being much larger, but also when prices escalate on natural rubber, more isoprene tends to get produced, as well as, earlier in the last decade, a lot of new capacity came online as well. So we've gotten to the point where there's more than adequate capacity for isoprene globally, and prices over the last 2 or 3 years, this is all historical, obviously, have been relatively steady by, like I say, I'll call them historical standards versus what you saw earlier in the decade. So where are the resin formers going to be produced? Well, that is tied very heavily to where is naphtha being cracked to make ethylene. And clearly from this graphic, the story is Northeast Asia. I'll say more specifically China, but you can see there that it's the dominant region by far currently in terms of heavy feedstocks to make ethylene, and in turn the production of the feedstocks to make hydrocarbon tackifying resins. A distant second would be Western Europe, although their crack slates are moving a little lighter, and Southeast Asia, which obviously cracks a fair amount of heavier feedstocks, but has just less producing capacity. So what's all that mean? Really, what we've seen over the last 5+ years is going to continue, and that is the feedstock monomers for making resins are going to continue to flow from Asia to both Europe and North America, or the Americas, and as well as some of the polymers being the resins themselves, depending on capacities in various regions. But that's something we've seen for a period of time, and there's no expectation that that's going to change in the future. In fact, as things grow, we might expect it to go the other way, and even additional resins flowing to the Western world, as we'll call it. So let's move on a little bit and talk a little bit about capacities. First, just this end-use matrix, some of you have probably seen before. There's a number of end markets for what we'll call tackifying resins, being the variety of conventional hydrocarbon resins, rosin-based competition, rosin esters, hydrogenated resins, which we'll talk about in a little more detail shortly, and even hybrids of the two. And depending on the market, some of these have been a little steadier over the recent course of time, but on the right side of the graphic, you'll see some green and red lines on there, with the red really indicating, maybe demand that is a little more at risk as hydrogenated hydrocarbon resins grow in capacity and availability. So that's really all this graph is telling you, just a little bit of a change in who's taking market share from who. Globally, I've just kind of assimilated all of this into one slide. The darker blue bar is just basically global hydrocarbon resin production. That's the sum of hydrogenated C5 and C9s in this case. That's how it's defined. The lighter blue bar is the growth in capacity, and you will see the growth in capacity far exceeding any growth that you might be seeing in demand, but which we categorize as production. And as a result, the other bar on the graph, utilization rates are basically have declined a little bit since peaking a little earlier in the decade. And you'll see, I'll give you a breakdown shortly, but most of this growth in capacity is clearly coming from growth in hydrogenated resin capacity. So a bit of a breakdown by what we'll call type of hydrocarbon resin. This shows the C5 global capacity. And I mean, a couple comments on here. There is a little bit of growth. Most of it certainly takes place in Asia Pacific, and even specifically, any growth we've seen since about 2018 has come via expansions within China. And not really anything on the books for 2020 in terms of notable expansions, but next year there's a couple expansions from a couple of the bigger producers in China that will add to the global capacity for C5s. For C9's story's a little bit different in that we see very little capacity growth over the last several years, and that will change slightly in 2021 with one new facility that's slated for a startup in China. Conversely, if anything, we've seen a little bit, anticipate a little bit of a decrease in capacity, net capacity within the Americas. So, but overall, like I said, one saving grace it has for the C9 end of things has certainly been that there has not been a lot of growth in capacity. So, the opportunity over a long enough period of time maybe to kind of grow into some of the existing capacity. Now, here's kind of really the story is the growth in hydrogenated tackifying resin capacity. And you can see, I mean, this is just shows since 2018, but you look at the huge amount of growth within the Asia Pacific region. That's, most of that again within China, and we'll detail that a little bit more. A little bit within the Western world as well. Europe had a new facility, sizable facility start up. There's, some plans within North America as well. So globally, there's been expansion everywhere in capacity, with certainly the lion's share of that occurring within Asia Pacific and more specifically China. Here's just a different graphic showing the buildup in hydrogenated resin capacity, and basically tells the story I've already mentioned here. Is the majority of the growth is taking place within China, but there's certainly other regions and countries of the world seeing growth. Singapore had a new facility in 2018. Korea had a new facility last year. Europe, same thing. Q4 of last year, a new sizable facility, and a little bit of growth in the Americas. But really, most of the expansion within China, and you'll note the last point on here is, between 2015, 2021, we estimate about 712 KT of capacity will have been added, most of it in China. That's bigger by a factor of, the market itself by about 240% from what capacity was, back in 2012. So there's a tremendous growth. A bit of an eye chart, which you can refer to later, but just kind of a breakdown of some of these projects and their capacities over the same time frame as the graphics I've just shown you. And basically, this year we'll see a bunch of expansion, and next year even more. The other thing I'd note on this graphic is the size of the expansions. Obviously, like most other industries, the further forward in time you go, the bigger the plants get, the better, the more economy of scale you're going to see. And that's certainly the case where traditionally a hydrogenated resin line might have been 15 or 20 KT. You're seeing now projects that are bringing on 100 KT at one shot, which is a huge amount of capacity relative to the size of the world market. And this is what the global footprint looks like, and really no surprise there that China's share of the footprint has increased dramatically since 2012, and even more dramatically since 2017. The last 3 or 4 years have seen just a tremendous growth. Singapore has entered the market, and that has kind of occurred at the expense of the Americas and Europe in terms of the percent of global capacity. By the end of next year, we're forecasting that China will be producing 43% of total hydrogenated resins globally. So it's a significant share of capacity. And the impact, and this got mentioned previously, I think in Michael's presentation, is with additional supply, pricing has certainly got more aggressively as more people are competing, and that in turn has improved demand, where you've seen hydrogenated resins take some market share from conventional hydrocarbon resins, from rosin ester businesses as well. So a lot of that's occurred. Our forecast would be is that sort of substitution. We've seen most of that already, but expect a little bit going forward, but also do expect better than average growth rates on hydrogenated resins at something more typical, approaching 2 times global GDP. One final graphic before a bit of a wrap up is just wanted to point out that the market structure of the hydrocarbon resin market is evolving a little bit over the course of time. You know, you might have characterized it as a very fragmented market with a lot of producers over the course of time. You know, as of and these are kind of year-end 2019 numbers. You know, we estimate about 60 different producers for hydrocarbon resins globally, and the top 5 of those producing about 41% of the capacity. You know, if you break it down by resin, what you'll see is the hydrogenated resins are probably the most concentrated or most, the plants are bigger, the plants are newer, so it's looking a little more like you might expect following the 2080 rule, where, you know, the top 5 producers produce almost 70%, have 70% of the capacity, and it only takes 40% of the producers to get to 8%. The other end of the spectrum is C9 resins, where there's still a lot of producers out there, a lot of smaller plants, which one could argue that, you know, maybe can lead to more consolidation down the road, you know, and but you know, the hydrogenated market itself is the one that's the most consolidated of the 3 by far, given the fact that the plants are newer, the plants are bigger, and just the scale of the players that are involved. So to recap, what I've shown you is really, you know, first 2 points relate to feedstocks, that ethylene plants, you know, are what drives the availability of feedstock. We crack lighter feedstocks in North America and Europe, moving in that direction. And as a result, North America and Europe will continue to import both the feedstocks for making hydrocarbon resins and the resins themselves. The you know, how much extraction gets done on, particularly on the C5 monomers, is a function of what's going on with isoprene. Right now, global tire demand is kind of, we'll call it lackluster, and maybe I'm being generous. So you know, we're in a period really of sustained period of lower pricing as it relates to those 2. Hydrocarbon resins continue to take market share from the others. It's been going on for a number of years now that we've got what we'll call adequate capacity on the hydrogenated resin side, but kind of see that returning more to organic growth going forward. And, you know, as was obviously from the slides, the capacity of hydrocarbon resin production has been increasing. You know, most of it is coming from hydrogenated resins. Most of it's occurring in Asia. You know, that trend will continue. You know, it's going to be interesting to see post 2022 how many, you know, additional plants might get announced for Asia Pacific, because certainly there's more than adequate capacity to serve the hydrogenated resin market in particular at this point. And finally, you know, the market, like most other maturing markets, I guess, is consolidating to fewer larger players, although it definitely has a long way to go, just given the number of producers globally. And that concludes my presentation, and we'll be happy to take questions during the Q&A period.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And I remind the guys that you can do questions through our questions app there in GoToWebinar. Now it's time for me to introduce you Song Lifeng from China. In the middle of his national holiday and Moon Festival, he's here ready to work. Song Lifeng has been a presenter in our international conference for a long time. I guess more than 30 years. Is that true, Song?
He needs to unmute. Unmute, Song. You self-muted. There you
We
go.
are not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about 30 years. Yeah.
Yes. In spite you are younger than 30 something, no? Okay.
Let me now, I'm on the screen is my presentation, PPT?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Okay, but let me see my. Yep, oh, sorry. Okay, good morning and good afternoon to European people. Good morning to the North American people, and good evening to Asian people. Yeah. Now today is really a special day to Chinese. It's a Chinese National Day, and in the meantime, it also coincidentally it's also a Chinese Lunar Moon Festival Day. So it's a very big day to Chinese. So it's also a very big holiday to Chinese. From today, the first day, and will be 8 days holiday to Chinese. Okay, first of all, I want to share with everybody now about Chinese festival with happiness, prosperity, yeah, with everybody. First, and I'm so sorry, my just in the last after in the past 1 year, my language ability not really get any improved. Okay, I'm trying my best. Okay, yeah, I just take this time to talk a little bit about Chinese situation of rosin, gum rosin industry in China, and what's the development here in China. First of all, I want to just show everybody that coronavirus is really big issue to the world. Really influenced everybody, every family, every country, every industry. Yeah. So now China is basically control the pandemic is okay, it's very well. Now almost we stopped. If there's any new cases come out, it basically come from imported. It's not really generally come from the domestic. So that's the situation in China. We can see the almost the zero increase new cases from China. Now, in the traditionally to say Chinese this year, 2020 in China, in Chinese lunar year, I'm sorry. Oh, in Chinese lunar new year, it's a mouse year. Actually, China used 12 animals to name every 12 years in our time, in my calendar. The mouse year to Chinese people is not really a lucky year. So normally, some disasters happened in China. In China, normally it's come from the mouse year. So just roughly. Unfortunately, this concept was confirmed again this year. It's really big disaster, not only to China, only to the humans. It's a really big one. So only 200,000 daily increase. Nowadays, it's over 30,000 cases. Nearly about more than 1 million people dead. So it's a really big disaster. The COVID-19 was really controlled now in China, but all the economic activity has been resumed gradually back to normal. It is reported that the GDP achieved a 3.2% increase in the second quarter. And in the meantime, global economic growth this year is forecasted about minus 5.2, announced by the World Bank 8th of June. But today I see the Matra's report already, this number has adjusted up to 4.6%. So that's it's getting a better situation. But in the chemical business, in the pine chemical business now, it's not so optimistic as I. Here's, yeah. Okay, yeah. Only the business related to the pandemic, like the antibacterial, this kind of products, is okay before Q3. A lot of order come into China, so the turpentine consumption is increasing. Yeah. But all the others, no, there's very difficult to get order from domestic or even from the abroad. Price was very under pressure at that time. The market is very at a low level. The harvesting of these new crops, Chinese crude gum, was delayed a few months due to COVID-19. And we see today that the lower crude gum price push farmers to delay their sales further. Yeah, that's today's situation. Yeah, well, people expected a better price ahead. So the result is that the crude gum is not sufficient in market during Q3. So there are little bit of shortage in the market at this moment. We see that last year, 2019, the total production of gum rosin in China is about 410,000, a little bit less than 2018. So that's not like we forecasted at the beginning of the 2019. There would be a big decreasing, but not really happen as people expected earlier. But the final output is 410, so not dropped that much. So the gum rosin export, Chinese gum rosin export, the volume decreasing continuously. We can see that has already down to 35.4 thousand tons. That trend keep just in the past few years, like since we can see from the chapter that since 2012 continually to take downtrend. But in the meantime, imported rosin volume increasing very fast, and this trend is very clear and will remain this trend well in next years. So you can see that from the chapter, we see that Chinese rosin annual downtrend, and this trend is going to be taught in the coming years. It is an reversible trend for China to import more rosin and turpentine in future. In the past few years, China has completed a process from the net export market to net import market, and it remains the largest single downstream processing market and consumption market in the world. So this is clearly it's a future scenario. More rosin and turpentine is imported from Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, and any other countries. And more crude gum come into China. So about 30,000 tons crude gum rushing to China only in 2019. That's really, get more raw material supply as a make balance to the demand, to the basic demand of China. So it's so important. And also the rosin important, we can see that last year was 70,000 tons. This is the very latest number from statistics. We can see the rosin imported by the country from Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So the number is really increased. You can see from more volume come from Brazil and Argentina. And we can see also another chart from the left side is crude gum imported by countries. We can see that more crude gum come from Indonesia and Madagascar, and also Uganda, and Brazil. So along with rosin production slightly down, total gum turpentine volume was almost remained balanced in 2019, and supply became sufficient in the second half of the year 2019. Coming to 2020, affected by the coronavirus pandemic, demand to products related to detergent got the big increase first half this year. Terpenol, pine oil, camphor, isoponic acetate export volume increased about 30 to 50%. That's a really big increase. And in the meantime, pinene demand decreased 40%. And for export market. So you can see that. From the right side down chart, we can see that turpentine total performance in China. The domestic oil supply, and we can see that the oil supply is a green column, and the demand side is a purple column. We can see that we forecast 2020 that demand from the demand increase is higher than the supply. So that's the general forecast for this year's turpentine situation in China. So finally, I just want to say, make a summary for my presentation is COVID-19, crude oil price, US-China relations really factors influence all business seriously today and within next years. So which is not really good one. Worldwide rosin production in 2020 takes downtrend, while consumption is also at weak period. Basically, it is still at the balanced range of level. The turpentine looks slightly tight, but don't play it over again. In China and worldwide, we see that price changing recently very fast. But I think it's maybe it's too high expectation and play it over too much. It is estimated that Chinese gum rosin production in 2020 would be taking around 15% decreasing. Right now, it's more than that. But finally, in the end of this year, will be a little bit recover back. So that's what we forecast, maybe 15 or a little bit higher than 15%. So that's the estimation of this year's total rosin production. To the end of this year, the number of Chinese rosin plants will be getting further down. So that's a very clearly trend. There are less than 100 companies will be left, very possibly. So much more rosin plants shut down. For China, is a huge pine chemical consumption market. So more rosin will be needed. Just like last year, I said, 200,000 ton imported rosin to China a year is not really a prediction far away from now. It's a trend. Right now, it's about 70. Last year, 70,000 ton. Maybe next few years will be over 100,000 ton. Integration is a way of Chinese industry, rosin pine chemical industry, the way out, because now it's a lot of integration will be happened in China. But it's until now it's go slowly. That's is a factor. That's because of there's not really a lack of the really more capital power involving in this activity. So that's the situation. All the industry number of company will be further reduced through the integration. That's a trend. For the hydrocarbon reasons, to the raw industry, powerful competitor really come from hydrocarbon reason industry in China, just like we just Steve talked about that the hydrocarbon reason industry in China is so strong, so big volume increasing, almost take 40% of the global hydrocarbon production volume. So we are here, so we really facing strong competition in China to the Chinese gumrows in consuming market. So that's I believe in the future this hydrocarbon reason will be becoming more powerful. Finally, I think pine chemical is a green industry. It's obviously it's a very bright in future. I believe it's still will take very long time or still have a lot of room to grow. So finally, I want to say challenge and opportunity has always been with us. I'm in this industry 30 years. That tells me that this is real. This is real. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Now, I'm sorry for my poor language. Okay. Thank you for your time. Okay.
Okay, Li-Feng, after Ricardo's presentation, we are going to go to the Q&A, and we have some questions for you also. Now it's time for Ricardo. Ricardo is located here in São Paulo, just a few kilometers from where I'm sitting today. After 27 years working for DRT in Brazil, setting the business from zero, he took a sabbatical year and now is back as an independent consultant on pine oil resin production and industrialization. Market analysis, supply chain, and logistics. So, Ricardo.
Okay, can you see my screen, Alex?
Yes, we can see the screen and hear you very well.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I will talk about sustainability. I think it's a very big issue that we have today worldwide. So, Brazilian gum rosin, a sustainable and renewable raw material. Today's agenda, I will talk a little bit about pine forest location in Brazil. We'll give you some Brazil data. We'll talk about Brazil sustainability, historical export data, COVID-19 impacts, current market situation, and conclusions. Here you have the map of South America. Notice that tapped pine forests in Brazil are located in southeast and south regions. Not a single Amazonian tree has been cut to be replaced by the tapped pine tree in Brazil. Brazilian tapped forests are located around 2,000 miles away from the Amazonian region. Some Brazil data. Brazil is a big country. Our total surface is 150 million hectares. 30 million hectares are cities and infrastructure. 77 million hectares for agriculture and planted forests that represent 9% of Brazil's total surface. With only 9% of Brazil's total surface, we feed more than 1.5 billion human beings worldwide. We have 68 million hectares as natural pastures, 112 million hectares as planted pastures, 117 million hectares as indigenous lands, and 446 million hectares as preserved lands. Indigenous area that are preserved plus preserved areas reach 67% of Brazil's total surface. I repeat that, it's very important. 67% of Brazilian total surface is preserved. In addition, forest owners have to keep preserved by law at least 20% of their total land in current kept areas. Planted pine forest. The total surface is 1.6 million hectares. The majority of planted pine forests are used for cellulose, kraft paper, and timber. Only 5% represent selected areas for tapping. Currently, I estimate a total of 80,000 hectares for tapping, including young growing forests. Tapped pine species in Brazil. The majority, around 85 to 90%, is Pinus ellioti. But we have also some tropical pine species being tapped in Brazil, like Pinus caribea, Caribea hondurensis, Caribea bahamensis, and Oocarpa. But tapped pine species in Brazil is decreasing. Pine history in Brazil. In the 70s, we have the deployment of forests. At that time, Brazil used to import 30,000 metric tons of gum rosin. During the 80s, pine tapping begins, plus start of genetic pine tree selection. In the end of the 80s, we have the turning point. Brazil started to export some volumes of gum rosin. In the 90s, Brazil consolidated itself as a player in the international market. In the 2000s, Brazil overtook Indonesia as the second largest gum rosin producer. In the last 6 years, Brazil doubled its production in a sustainable way. And today, Brazil is the largest gum rosin exporter worldwide. Building sustainability. How has Brazil built its sustainability? With huge investments in research, genetic selection, looking for higher pine oleoresin yields, faster growth, improving chemical stimulation, and training people. This is a typical, in the picture you have a typical Pinus ellioti tapped forest in Brazil. Natural versus planted forests. In natural forests, we have a low planting density, 200 to 300 pine trees per hectare. Natural genetic selection, slow growth. Tapping starts after 15 years. Tapping activity will take place less than 5 years. There is no stimulant use. Nevertheless, it's a renewable activity, but not sustainable. The best example is China. On the other hand, we have planted forests. High planting density, 1,100 trees per hectare. It means around 9 square meters per pine tree. Genetic selection, fast growth. We start tapping after 8 years, and we will tap at least for 12 years. In the end of the cycle, around 20 years, 700 to 800 trees per hectare will remain. Our current target is 4 metric tons of pine oil resin per hectare per year. We have stimulant use, and this activity is renewable and sustainable. We have two very good examples in South America, Brazil and Argentina. Let's compare a little bit what happened in China and in Brazil in the last 6 years. In China, pine oil resin production decreased by 38%. In 2014, they produced 821,000 metric tons of pine oil resin. Last year, 507,000 metric tons. As you saw in the previous presentation, this year the production will be lower. In Brazil, pine oil resin production doubled in the last 6 years. Last years, we reached 220,000 metric tons. China and Brazil got different strategies with different results. In this particular field, China thinks in the short term and Brazil thinks in the long term. Brazilian sustainability has ensured a solid growth. The graph shows fast, solid, and sustainable growth over the last years. Brazil offered increasing volumes, answering the global demand. COVID-19 impact on Brazilian gum rosin exports. In the first graph on the left, we have 4 columns. First quarter, second quarter of last year, first quarter and second quarter of this year of Brazilian gum rosin exports to Europe, the most traditional Brazilian market. In the first semester of 2020, the volumes shipped to Europe decreased by 22%. On the other hand, in the second graph on the right, we have Brazilian gum rosin exports to Asia. Export volumes increased by 41% in this first semester of this year when compared to last year. Global Brazilian gum rosin exports during the first semester of this year increased by 10% when compared with last year. What's next? Who will remain competitive in the gum rosin market? In my personal opinion, those who will be able to combine planted forest with genetic selection, high density, 900 trees per hectare with tapping, FSC certification, better pine oil resin yields, on average 4.5 to 5 kilos per tree per year, meaning 4 metric tons hectare year. Fast growing trees, start tapping at 8 years, more effective stimulants and tapping automation. Brazil is ready to continue growing in the gum rosin market in a sustainable way. And this is the Brazilian message to our clients. Buy Brazilian gum rosin, by sustainability, by environmental protection, by social responsibility, by quality, by forest certifications. Now, I would like to thank all Brazilian gum rosin clients worldwide in their own language. Thank you. Xie. Arigatou gozaimashita. Merci beaucoup. Vielen Dank. Grazie mille. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much for the presentation. And we have some questions for the presenters. Steve,
Yes.
Steve, are you there? We have a couple of questions from you. I'm going to put together two questions, one from Bernardo Melo and the other one from Bernardo Melo is a consultant in Brazil. Mariana Jorge Ferreira is the head of the Grupo Resinas Brazil in Europe. And they have to do with green sustainability and hydrocarbon resins. Let me read Bernardo's question. How Steve expects the impact in hydrocarbon resin market with the current trend in utilization of renewable products? Is this a fact that may affect the hydrocarbon resin market in short, medium, or affect it all? What's your opinion?
I would say opinion is yes, especially over the longer haul. I guess, it's a point we've discussed, be it circular economy, renewable, whatever you want to call it, but that's certainly one advantage of rosin-based chemistry over the hydrocarbon resin. So the expectation is that that's certainly something that could maybe stem the tide a little bit in terms of we'll call it the substitution towards hydrocarbon resins, particularly like I said, some of the newer generation resins that are maybe people are still looking for, low color, low odor, that sort of thing. So particularly some of the newer products we're seeing from some of the producers certainly feel that over the medium to longer haul, they could certainly take back market share, in the context of, circular economy, renewables, et cetera there, but going to take a little bit of time, but certainly seems like the efforts being made there where we are seeing products that can compete, we think, over the longer haul effectively with, be it hydrogenated resins or any other resin.
Okay, thank you. And then Stacy Jordal from Ingevity is asking, Steve, is there a particular market or application driving the 2 times GDP growth of hydrogenated hydrocarbon resin? Or is it simple anticipated share shifts from rosin-based resins to hydrogenated hydrocarbon resins?
I would say that probably one of the stronger things driving towards is the hygiene end of things here too, and particularly, be it more of an Asia Pacific type phenomenon where, a growing middle class, et cetera, means more, be it disposable diapers, other hygiene related products. So that's certainly one area where we expect, better than average growth in there. Not so much, I think, the second part of that question was really, is it a function of taking market share from the other rosins? And certainly what I didn't really show, if we went back a little further in history, is, we've certainly seen hydrogenated resin growth, to the tune in, 13, 15% for a number of years. And some of that is certainly taking share from other products. We expect to see less of that going forward and a little more what we'll call organic growth in there. But the flip side of it tends to be is with increased production comes increased, let's call it market competitiveness. So you're seeing hydrogenated resins sold into markets that maybe typically you wouldn't seen in the past, things like even road markings that, traditionally you wouldn't have thought that's really an outlet for hydrogenated resins. But, as it gets more competitive, maybe as cost to produce get a little lower with economy of scale, you're seeing more of that as well. But by and large, most of the substitution we would feel has taken place. There's still some to come, but and the growth question, I think, with respect to hygiene, I think I answered at the outset.
Thank you very much, Steve. Song Li Feng, are you there?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to put 2 questions together, one from Dale Hobson, Simbrise, and the other one again from Mariana Jorge Ferreira, Grupo Resinas Brazil. And this, the question is, if China doesn't tap as much in 2020, that means there is more potential for tapping in 2021.
Oh, yeah. Actually, Now, China has the main problem. Actually, it's two questions. This two aspects. One is resources situation. One is price factor. I think the pine resources in China is getting worse, especially from Pinus Masoniana forest is getting old, getting less. But some new pine resources coming out from China is really basically come to the Pinus Elioti. So Elioti production is okay. Tapping situation is getting better, but Pinus Masoniana tapping situation is getting worse in China. Another one is the price. Actually, this year, in 2019, price was lower, and this year the lower price didn't really stimulating people to stay in forest, especially COVID-19 really affected people tapping activity. So that's really get this year tapping business getting slow very much compared to normal year. But next year, 2021, I believe basically everything depending on crude gum price. If the price is okay, tapping volume will be.
Thank you very much, Song Lifeng. I have here a couple of questions from Spencer Chen, Bernardo Melo, and Mariana Jorge Ferreira. And basically, Ricardo, are you there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I am.
How do you see in general the new the Brazilian crop of pine oleoresin for these years in terms of the effects of coronavirus?
Well, we used to say here in Brazil that the future belongs to God. But if you saw in my presentation, in the first semester, we increase volumes. We export more than previous year, okay? So, and this was a surprise for me. Looking back, what were my feeling? In January, I was not expecting at all an increase in volumes in Brazil, but we had, okay? So now is the moment where farm owners will take the decision to tap or not during the next season and how much they will tap. And as we see in the presentation of my colleague Song, in China volumes are decreasing. So there is a space for additional volumes, and I think Brazil can supply the next season with more volumes in a sustainable way.
And Mariana is asking if you see other place in the world that can be growing as a pine oleoresin producer.
Well, I see these in South America, both Brazil and Argentina. I think these two countries, they have sustainable activity in pine oleoresin production.
Okay, Ricardo, thank you very much. And thank you very much, all the panelists of this session too. We are just 2 or 3 minutes late to start our session 3. Session 3 is going to bring 4 presenters from Europe. So we are going to have first Marcos Taldo-Spiri and Sorin Bunel. They are from CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, and he are going to introduce us to those issues. Marcos, I see you there. I am trying to figure out.
Yeah, I'm here, but thank you very much actually for the presentation, but I cannot find the button to share the screen. It's not.
I shared it with Solene, so let me share it with you instead. I wasn't sure who was going to be doing the actual presentation. So
okay, perfect. Now.
There you go. You should just be able to, there you go.
Okay, perfect. That was easy.
Okay, so
are you seeing like the full screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can see the
we see the presentation mode though.
Perfect. So it's how it should be, right? Or
not
no?
Exactly. No, we can see, the notes.
And now?
Yeah, perfect.
Now, yes.
Now it's correct. Thank you very much, sir.
Perfect.
So, Marco and Solene, you are in charge now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much actually for having us here. And in this introduction to CDP, we will show how we support businesses to implement natural capital and supply chain approaches to tackle environmental challenges. Today's CDP is represented by me of the Forest team and by Solene, who is account manager of the supply chain team. And both of us are based in Europe, in Berlin. So probably many of you already know CDP, and CDP is a non-profit environmental organization, and we run a global environmental disclosure platform. And disclosure and transparency are the foundation of our work. We collect information regarding environmental issues such as climate change, deforestation, and water security issues from organizations all over the world. And we pass then this information back to CDP's main stakeholder groups that are key to the CDP disclosure model. So we share the information first with investors. We work with more than 500 institutional investors, such as BlackRock, Amundi, and they represent more than 100 trillion US dollar in assets. They are collectively pushing the world's largest companies to disclose. The second group of stakeholders that we are working with are corporations or purchasers. And through the supply chain program, companies are leveraging their 3 trillion purchasing power to request information from more than 10,000 suppliers from around the globe to report on their environmental risk, opportunities, and impact. And whether companies are responding to investor or to customer requests, they are using our tools to evaluate their own sustainability work and benchmark their performance. The reported data is then used by investor and by the purchasing company to deliver tangible results to their bottom line and to their environment. In fact, we are sharing detailed and actionable feedback. As a result of this request, this year we have more than 10,000 companies representing more than 55% of the world market capitalization that disclose environmental information through CDP questionnaires. As I mentioned before, we collect the information on climate change, deforestation, and water security issues. These issues are connected by inextricable links. For instance, forests can provide 23% of mitigation needed until 2030 in terms of carbon emission, and 30% of what is needed before 2050. On the other hand, extreme weather events and change of climate patterns often lead to loss of forests and their resources or affect badly their productivity, and that is very relevant for your industry. Moreover, 75% of global fresh water depends on forests and their filtration power, and water shapes the physical landscape and governs vegetation. Then, if you look at the linkages, between water and climate, We understand the water is essential for climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, while climate variability is affecting the water cycle and entails water-related risk. So we have all these connections are increasingly reflected in the way that CDP questionnaires are developed. To show these interlinkages and to reduce the burden for companies that want to report on all these three issues, we are performing an exercise of alignment. As a result, already our three questionnaires present an alignment between several of their modules. The highlighted modules that you can see here are built in the same way. And you can expect for the future a fully integrated questionnaire where all the three themes plus other new metrics for reporting on environmental issues such as biodiversity loss or use of land will be covered. And this integrated questionnaire is expected to be released for the 2022 cycle. Our questionnaires are created not only to collect information, but they provide also companies with a logical framework with precise steps to be followed to understand, manage, and reduce their environmental impact. They provide strong guidelines and are constantly kept updated and aligned with the latest global reporting standards. For the forest questionnaire, for instance, with the accountability framework, and overall the three ones with the GRI, TCFD recommendation, and so on. So how is CDP helping you to work with nature? We are introducing a natural capital approach in the business model is a call to action to all companies, right? We must protect, restore, and improve the management of the world forest to achieve 1.5 degrees of global warming scenario. And failing to do so continues to undermine the climate stability, biodiversity, water security, global health, and also economic prosperity. And there is no question that corporate action can make a meaningful difference, so you need to step up your ambition. Then I want to see from another perspective, how is finance understanding the natural capital approach? Adam Kenser, the global head of corporate engagement for forest at BNP Paribas, in a recent webinar said something very powerful. Like, if I have a client with a carbon emission reduction strategy, and this client has also a business linked to any forest risk commodities, but does not know the exposure to deforestation of their supply chain, then I'm forced to think that the reduction strategy is compromised because emissions are underestimated. This is a strong statement. And Adam said this because the carbon emissions coming from deforestation and land use change are enormous. If you look at this graph, we see the stopping emission from deforestation, developing climate smart agriculture, and sustainable agroforestry in terms of reduction of carbon emission can have a higher impact than turning the entire world to use renewable energy. So you can understand of what impact we are speaking here. Which kind of pragmatic implication has this? A simple but fundamental one. Companies with exposure to deforestation must assess and then manage the deforestation in their supply chain. And these companies should include emissions from deforestation in their climate targets and introduce other deforestation-specific targets. Set and implement no deforestation policies as part of the climate action plans, and disclose on progress in eliminating deforestation and related emissions, along with overall progress on climate targets. And we are really aware of the complexity of this task of tracking, managing, reducing exposure to deforestation and carbon emissions in the supply chain. Hence, CDP has a special program to help companies in this challenge. And Soline will now explain you how CDP supply chain program works and how it can support you. Soline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect.
Yes, we can.
So if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much. So as Marco explained, so climate change and deforestation issues are closely linked. And engaging with your suppliers on environmental issues is actually key to achieve targets and drive real positive change in your supply chain. So as Marco mentioned as well, so we have what we call the supply chain program, which that companies can join, so purchasing organization can join to engage with the suppliers and invite them to respond to CDP questionnaires. And the program is actually very successful because we have today more than 150 members globally across all sectors that are representing more than $4 trillion in procurement spend. And this year, those suppliers have requested 15,000 suppliers to disclose environmental information to CDP. And so what we can see on this slide is one indicator of the success of the program. So the program was created about 10 years ago, and it was an initiative or a request from companies willing to collect environmental information from their suppliers in the same way that they were themselves disclosing information to investors. And so across the 10 years of the program, we saw the cascade effect where sustainability commitments and positive change have cascaded upstream through supply chains. And one successful example of the cascade being put into practice involves 3 clusters of members within the program. So the first one is major retailers, such as Metro or Walmart, that are part of the program and engaging with the suppliers. And they are, as part of the suppliers, they are engaging with major FMCG companies, such as L'Oreal, Johnson & Johnson. And those FMCG companies are also themselves engaging with strategic suppliers, such as companies from the flavors and fragrances industry, where we see Firmenich, Givaudan, IFF, and Symrise, which are also part of the program and working with their own suppliers. So these companies have become closely aligned in their environmental ambitions, and they are also helping to inspire higher levels of action further downstream and upstream. And so the program is also an opportunity for our members to work collaboratively through joint initiatives and sectoral working groups, such as the Flavors and Fragrances one. So for them, this is a great opportunity to engage with suppliers with, not yet, Marco, to engage suppliers with a united voice and also with an aligned industry message, which helps drive positive change further upstream. So this means having aligned KPIs, organizing joint supplier support webinars or feedback initiatives. Then on the next slide, I wanted to discuss about the benefits of the program. So members of the program see a lot of added value. For example, it can help them and can help you assess and manage environmental risks in your supply chain. And I will come back to that point on the risks and give more details in a minute. Then the second point is also about helping you raise awareness and build capacity among your suppliers. It can be done through the free resources we provide to your suppliers, and also the exercise of responding to our questionnaires is also something that's helped build capacity and raise awareness. The questionnaires, for example, they are designed to allow an assessment of the maturity, but it's also a good exercise for companies to identify their strengths and, more importantly, to identify their areas of improvement. Then our questionnaires also allow members to identify collaborative opportunities that could actually be so implemented with their suppliers and that could be mutually beneficial. So in addition to that, we also launch initiatives to encourage this collaborative work. So one recent example is the new Global Supply Chain Forest Member Challenge that we have just launched, and that aims at fostering collaboration between members and their suppliers, and that also help them increase member use of, help our members to better use supplier data in order to drive the supply chain action needed to meet zero deforestation goals. So through this project, members can identify and implement projects with their suppliers, and the selected projects will be recognized and showcased at the CDP side event organized at COP26. And I think what's important is this challenge is for members of the program, but also for companies that would like to join the program now and would like to work on the forest topic. And finally, also the program also allow you to collect primary data to assess supplier performance, and all these help you measure progress and achieve ambitious targets, so be it science-based targets or zero deforestation targets, etc. Then on the next slide, I wanted to highlight one point on the risks. If you could, thank you, Marco. So on the risk aspect, so if we look at forest commodities, we all know that acting on deforestation costs less than the potential impacts. And in this slide, what we see is that among suppliers that answered CDP Forests questionnaire, we see that 47% of them reported undertaking forest-related risk assessments. So this is a figure that can be improved, but then it also provides a lot of useful information. So what we see also is that on average, 72% of the total financial impacts that are at risk from deforestation is actually associated with reputation and market trends. So this covers, for example, negative media coverage, increased stakeholder concern or negative stakeholder feedback, but also increased commodity prices. And then on the other hand, for water, we see that 71% of the total financial impact is associated with physical risks, such as increased severity of extreme weather events or changes in precipitation patterns. So these risks, if not assessed and managed properly, can have tremendous consequences on your business activities. And let me conclude on a call to action for everyone. So there is absolutely no doubt that the corporate world has a great role to play to tackle deforestation, to fight climate change, and to improve water security. And there is also no doubt that going beyond your own operation is needed because your biggest impacts are upstream and downstream, including in your supply chain. So if we move on the next slide, we can see the call to action in 3 phases, in 3 steps. So the first step is to establish solid foundations by understanding the impact of your supply chain. Then step 2 is to engage directly with your suppliers and provide them with actionable feedback to build capacity. And finally, step 3 is to improve performance and drive environmental action. So if you would like to hear more about CDP supply chain and how we can help you in this journey, you can see on the next slide 2 links to register to one of our supply chain webinar series on achieving sustainability targets through supply chain transformation. And so I invite you to register to all 2 upcoming webinars. But you can also contact us per email. So you can see on this slide our contact details. And if you have any question on the program, on this presentation, and if you want to hear more on the supply chain program, please contact us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Stoline, for your participation and enlightening us about the CDP project. Now, we are going to have Paul Girard. He's a CEFIC Sector Group and Advocacy Manager. And it's going to talk about the European Union Renewable Energy Directive. Paul.
Hello, Alex. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think all of us can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Here I am based in Belgium, Brussels. Can you see my screen? I would like to share it, but
yes,
it doesn't seem to be working.
We are seeing your screen.
Perfect. Good. So thank you very much to
Paul.
Yes.
Paul, sorry. If you in display settings, yes, there.
And I should swap. Is it better now?
Perfect.
Good. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to PCA, Alex and Amanda for that very nice opportunity. This is my very first participation to the convention, so it's quite new to me, but I'm very glad to be here with you. What I'm going to present is a quite high-level presentation describing what is the European Renewable Energy Directive, what are the key principles, and some quite interesting information about very recent development that only started to happen a few weeks ago. So all of that is quite very much new. So I hope you would find it interesting. But before to start with, a quick introduction about myself. So I joined the European Council of the Chemicals Industry, CEFIC, a year ago. CEFIC is actually the voice of the chemicals industry towards the European institutions. So we are a lobbying organization based in Brussels, and we interact on a daily basis with European decision makers and politicians. In that organization, I am in particular a member of the Specialty Chemicals and Public Affairs Department. So actually, I'm part of two departments, and one of my key roles is actually to make sure that these two teams are well connected and speak to each other, which is not necessarily an easy task every day. My level of expertise is actually really based on the functioning of the European Union institutions. So I've done a university background, a post degree in the functioning of these institutions. So my role is really to guide industries and companies on how to interact with the European institutions and how can they make their voice heard, so that we are sure that at the end of the day, the European policies really reflect the views of the chemicals industry. In particular, and what is interesting for you today is one of the CEFIC sector groups is one of the chemicals industry groups that I'm working with at the moment is ARPA, the Hydrocarbon Resins, Rosin Resins, and Pine Chemicals Producers Association. So ARPA is a sector group that is under the umbrella of CEFIC. To start with, a bit of history about the European Union renewable energy policies. I'm not going to go through all of these different steps that you can see on the screens, but what the key messages I would like to share with you is, well, first of all, the European Union started to consider renewable energy already almost 30 years ago. So it's not new. However, it is true that the political interest for renewable energy has only been increasing over these last years, meaning that the ambitions of the European Union to work on renewable energies has only grown over these past years. Also, one of the key difficulty, however, that the European Union had to deal with is basically the European Union is composed of 27 formerly 28 member states. So how can you make sure that you can actually develop the right infrastructure for renewable energy across all of these different countries, which were obviously not having from the start the same resources? You know, they did not start with the same also political interest. You can see on the screen that Germany and Denmark were among the very first to start developing some infrastructure, but still today, many countries, mostly I would say in Central Europe, are not yet at the same stage. So came the idea of developing an harmonized policy framework for renewable energy policies. That idea was really led by the intention of the European authorities to make sure that all the countries can develop up to the same speed in terms of infrastructure for renewable energies. So the original Renewable Energy Directive, which is basically the law that set up that framework that I just talked about, was adopted in 2009. Quite conveniently, we started to call it RED, which stands for Renewable Energy Directive. So every time you hear me saying RED, I'm referring to that European law. And it established, as I said, a common framework based on targets that each member state are free to develop the ways to achieve these targets in terms of developing renewable energy policies. However, not so long ago, actually, in 2018, the directive was revised, meaning that the law was reopened to take into consideration a whole new set of criteria. To name that new version of the directive, we started to call it RED 2, again, quite conveniently, and and now we are also referring to the former version of the directive as RED 1. Actually, since it was only adopted a couple of years ago, it is still being implemented at the moment. It doesn't yet really apply, or not entirely. And basically, what is happening right now is that each member state of the EU have to transpose that European law in a national law. So this is a process that is nationally driven. It is not something that the EU interacts much with, but this is what is happening. And the deadline for that transposition exercise is mid of next year. So what are basically the new elements that emerge from that revision of the RED? Well, as I said, the political agenda for sustainability and the objective to reduce the GHG emissions have growing over this past year. So that was, I think, one of the drivers that led to the revision of the directive. And in the RED 2, in comparison to the first version of the directive, we saw actually the creation and the inclusion of new criteria for sustainability and greenhouse gas emission savings for biofuels, bioliquids, and biomass fuels. Also, I referred earlier to the targets, the common EU targets that the member states are obliged to reach under a certain period. Well, in the RED 2, they have decided to put in place mandatory target by 2030 for the member states to reach at least 32 and 14% for the overall share of renewable energy in transportation. Among this 14% target, 3.5% has to be fulfilled with the development of advanced biofuels that are based on a list of feedstock, which is established in the Annex 9 of the RED 2 directive. And what is interesting for you to know, if not already, is that the Annex 9 list already includes, for example, the tall oil that is the co-product of the paper industry. The system works as this. Basically, biofuels that are made with these listed feedstock in the annex can be considered twice their energy content, meaning that in reaching the target, you can actually multiply by 2 the actual emissions reduction to reach the target. And that creates a system where at national level, incentives, subsidies are provided to biofuels manufacturers so that that sector can be supported in the overall objective of reducing emissions in the environment. And as I said, however, since these elements have to be transposed at national level, the member states are actually quite flexible in how they will achieve these targets. A few further comments, however, about RED 2. The member states cannot, however, do whatever they want, and they have to respect a certain series of various criteria to make sure actually that, for example, when it comes to biofuels, we can really see an added value for the environment. So, for example, when providing financial support schemes or incentives to the selection of certain feedstock for the manufacturing of biofuels, they need to respect what we call the waste hierarchy. So the waste hierarchy is not only, I believe, a European model or concept, it is a global concept that has been used and reused for many years now. But actually, in the EU, it has been enshrined into legislation in what we call the Waste Framework Directive. So it has become part of the European law, if you want. So they need to respect and to make sure that when selecting this feedstock, they actually respect that these are not waste, so the prevention of waste, and first that certain possibilities like the reusing, the recycling, or the recovery can be done before disposal. Also, they need to clarify that the diversion of its feedstock from different applications, existing applications, to biofuels production will not cause market or competition distortive effect. And also, they need to make sure that the biofuel sector will not take the entirety of the availability of that these feedstock, which are usually biomass, based on the principles of the circular economy. What is happening right now? So as I said, by mid-2021 next year, the member states will have to finalize the implementation of the directive. Also, at the same time, the Commission is to evaluate and take, the Commission, I'm referring here to the European Commission, which is the executive political body of the European Union. So the Commission will have to evaluate and decide whether new feedstock could be added to this Annex 9. And last but not least, in 2023 and then every 2 years, the same Commission will have to publish a report on whether this has had an impact on feedstock availability, on resource competition, and also possibly with reference to possible market and competition distortive effects. So that is for to come according to the text of the RED II as it is today. However, and this is what I referred in my introduction, some very interesting developments occurred very, very recently. If you don't know about that, if you haven't heard about that, just a quick word of introduction. In December 2019, so not even a year ago, the European Commission announced an entire new political agenda to frame and provide the backbone for all environmental policies to be adopted in the years to come. They called that agenda the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is a very, very broad and ambitious political agenda whose only objective is to change the way we consume and produce in Europe and to become a climate neutral continent by 2050. This is, of course, extremely ambitious. Do we have already the technologies? I think we can safely say no, but this is really the horizon. This is the line, and this is what the EU has given itself as an objective. You would have probably heard, actually, it happened less than 2 weeks ago, then China has announced climate neutrality by 2060. So we see already the repercussions of that European Union political agenda. But that, of course, changed the picture, because when the RED II directive was reviewed 2 years ago, we didn't have a Green Deal at that time. We didn't have the objective to become climate neutral by 2050. So everything about the targets, everything that has been agreed in the past, everything has to be reviewed now. Everything has to be evaluated to make sure that the targets from the past still fit for purpose in line with the objectives of today. And this is where it's getting really interesting. Basically, even if it was reviewed already, as I said, 2 years ago, the Commission has announced the next, very soon actually, revision, a reopening again of the same directive. Basically, that process has been triggered in August, so that's very, very new. It will assess how far the directive can contribute to, well, as I said, the new objectives, the higher EU climate ambition, and also we'll explore how to accelerate the transition for a further and more integrated energy system in Europe. So it is quite clear now that the Commission, which is at the initiative of the laws or the draft law in Europe, will propose a new, what we call a legislative proposal to reopen RED II. And they gave themselves actually a very ambitious, again, objective here, because it has to be delivered, that legislative proposal, around June 2021. So they gave themselves even less than a year in developing that new law, which is very short if we compare to the development of laws in general in the EU. A quick note, however, please bear in mind that the EU decision-making process is quite complex, and the development of new laws, even the revision of existing laws, usually take a lot of time. So we can expect actually that process, which is triggered now, and to be published and to be concretized as a legislative proposal by June 2021 will take actually, as from this month of June, 2 more years on average. It's from experience that we can quantify that number. Basically, it means that we won't see the end of that process before, I believe, it's my personal thinking here, but from experience, I believe the end of that process by 2023. So now there are a lot of questions circulating in Brussels, to be honest. Everything is really new in that regard. We don't know yet the direction where the Commission will take for the future of the directive. It's quite unclear, and a public consultation, a stakeholder consultation, just finished actually on Monday, and another one, a longer one, is expected to take place later this year. So a lot of stakeholders, a lot of industries, a lot of NGOs, of course, are preparing their position at the moment. There are going to be a lot of debates. If there is one question I would like to raise with you, and maybe to open the discussion, I don't have the answer to that question, but really one of the questions that we all have in mind at the moment in Brussels is that process going to lead to a RED 2.5, meaning finally the same system with only a few tweaks here and there where the targets would have been adapted to the new objectives? Or will we have what we could call a RED 3? And in that sense, I mean an entirely new and different and modernized EU policy framework for renewable energies. We do not know, but that's really the question that everyone interested in these questions is thinking about right now. So I'm finished here. I didn't go too much into details, but I'm very much happy to continue discussing with you during the Q&A, and also possibly after the convention. You have my contact. I believe the slides will be shared with you all. So voilà, I look forward to further discussing with you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, Paul. Yes, we have a question, but I'm going to leave that question after Lila's presentation, okay?
True, okay.
Okay. Lila, hello. We are moving now to Spain, I think, no?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well,
all right, let me share my screen.
She's the managing editor of Oleochemicals Analytics. And he's going to talk about fatty acid outlook. Lila?
Yes, can you see my screen all right?
We can see it perfectly, okay. And we can hear you perfectly well also.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this. There are a lot of there's a lot of volatility in this sector right now, and new announcements coming out every day. So it's interesting to look at some of the competition. I won't go very deeply into the economic outlook. We saw Martha's really excellent presentation about the economic outlook. And so what we can all extrapolate from it is that, you know, there's debate and uncertainty exist as to what form and how quickly the COVID, you know, post-COVID global economic recovery is going to happen. So if we look at this graph, you know, the composite leading indicators for August, they've continued to strengthen. But, you know, as we look to September, here in Europe, we've seen a resurgence of lockdowns on a regional basis. In fact, today, I believe in Spain, they're arguing about locking back down Madrid. So it's, you know, I think one thing we can all agree is that the economic outlook will remain below the long-term trends and levels that we saw pre-outbreak. So if we're going to look at what I came to talk to today, if we look at oleochemicals, the market maker globally for the oleochemicals is Southeast Asia. There's no question about that. They have the largest capacity and they are the market makers. But if we look at the main influences in Southeast Asia on oleochemical prices, then we really need to look at the palm oil complex. We started the year, you can see at the kind of left-hand side of the graph, we started the year with palm oil highs, mainly on supply constraints and yield constraints. And then you can see the gradual decline. There's some volatility in there, but generally, COVID started, and it started to affect economies globally. And you can see that decline marked, all the way to May. And then we can see the subsequent kind of choppy recovery that we're seeing to date. So what is really behind this price direction on CPO? And there are a few factors involved. I'd say probably the MPOB palm stocks are one of the main influencers. And so that's the green graph on the left. Malaysia's crude palm oil stocks saw 3-year lows in July. And so but they increased for the first time in months just in August. So, the outlook is really mixed as we are heading into peak harvest season right now. And so, with the lockdowns due to COVID, we're seeing labor shortages, and this could become, they have a lot of foreign workers that actually do the harvesting. And these labor shortages could become a real problem. There are many foreign workers that are not able to return to Malaysia because of there's a foreign travel ban. However, the government did exempt 3 sectors from the ban, including plantations, and the issue is that as long as the travel restrictions remain in place, they're not going to be able to really effectively bring back these large groups of harvesting workers that they usually would. So we look at palm oil prices. If I go back to this graph, we look at palm oil prices. They were going from Malaysian ringgit around 2,100 in May, and then we see them shooting up to over 2,700 Malaysian ringgits in September. And the interesting thing about that is that as we historically and seasonally, as we go into the peak harvest, we've always seen huge stocks and huge production, and that is not happening so far yet this year, and that's the big question mark for this sector. So, we have seen palm oil prices firm, mainly due to lower output and lower yield. But we also saw demand rise from India and China and restocking after they started to open up economies after the COVID lockdowns. And so, that's elevated all of the edible oils prices, and including corn oil, including soybean oil, and as the edible prices are all correlated, and so as they rise, they're pulling up everything. So that's the second thing that's going on with palm oil right now, is that you have really elevated soybean oil prices. And soybean oil and crude palm oil are directly correlated. And so at some point, when the Chinese market gets enough soybean inventory and soybean oil inventory in place, and the prices are quite high right now, they'll switch to palm oil. And so that's the correlation that you see, that rising demand out of China. So, nonetheless, it's hard to move away from the seasonal historical norms that we see every year. And so, most people in the sector think that palm oil price is going to pull back slightly, pull back some as we get into peak harvest. There's general peak harvest is always September through November. And so, there are risks, as I mentioned, the labor crunch. Recently they've discussed the La Nina weather pattern in place, and what that does, how it affects the palm oil, apart from, general crops, it affects it in that when we have La Nina, it generally makes the US quite dry. And so the soybean oil yields are declining if that comes into place as a strong La Nina, and as soybeans decline, then you're talking scarcity, and then you're talking higher prices, and those higher prices are also pulling up the palm oil prices. So, it is, we're seeing some atypical movements these days. And so it's something that literally you watch morning and evening every day. One of the kind of the relief valves in the past, and these have been put in place by Malaysia and Indonesia, is the use of palm oil into biodiesel. And that is how the Indonesians and Malaysians would mitigate a really lengthy supply glut on the palm oil side. And so what the issue is, the spreads right now from gas oil to palm oil is well over $350 per metric ton, which is huge. It makes blending economics unprofitable, unmanageable, and impossible. And so Indonesia and Malaysia both have a B20. Malaysia has B20, Indonesia has B30. But as we watch this, we're seeing it become more and more difficult for these two countries to fulfill these very aggressive blending mandates that they have in place. Because really, if palm oil is, if the premium is about $100 per metric ton, they're already fairly unprofitable. So at $350, it's impossible. And they don't have deep enough pockets to maintain this subsidy out of their Indonesian palm oil fund. So we're keeping an eye on that, and that will be something that is important to continue to watch over the rest of this year. Moving to, here are looking at some of the Southeast Asia fatty acid spot pricing. Fatty acid demand remains soft. And oleochemical producers in Southeast Asia, the market makers, say that, they're really not going to ramp up production with these expensive feedstock levels. And they're not going to ramp up production if they can't sell a product. And so they'll only ramp up, really, if product has somewhere to go. And so what that means is, truly, until we see Chinese retail consumption get life and really take off, the oleochemical producers in Southeast Asia are probably not going to run at extremely high elevated rates. China is the world's second largest economy, and they're the key driver to the global growth engine, really. And, we look at the retail sales dropped in July. I believe that there was some recovery in August. But really, until we see the Chinese demand come back, they're not going to turn on their plants and ramp them up. Now, we have seen in recent weeks an uptick in interest from China across the oleochemicals. There was some restocking ahead of the Golden Week and the different holidays that are happening right now. And so we figure that once those holidays are done, everybody's going to be closely watching what's going on in China as far as where's Chinese demand, because if that kicks off, that could change markets quite dynamically and quite sharply, really almost within a week's time, you could see a very different market dynamic. So we turn to the U.S. When we look at U.S. fatty acids, and we keep in mind the Southeast Asia pricing because they really control the global market. But we also look at different feedstocks in the U.S. and so those feedstocks are also affected by the palm oil price, as well as far as correlations and tightness and edible oils in general. So in the US, on the left-hand side, you'll see a graph. This goes back to January 2017. We closely watch BFT and choice white grease. We watch these. These are publicly traded. They're traded on the we watch the Wall Street Journal cash prices, record them every day. And as we head into autumn, the usual seasonal tallow demand dip that we see, Q4 is typically quite slow production-wise for oleochemicals. And to the biodiesel side, you have unfavorable cold weather characteristics of tallow into the biodiesel production. So historically, that's pushed prices lower. However, we have seen really increased prices on soybean oil. and demand increases from renewable diesel sector in North America and international markets. So there's a possibility that we could maintain tallow pricing at an elevated level into autumn months, but it's something, again, we all have to watch. Right now, what happened with the soybean oil on a lot, with the trade fight between the US and China, and Chinese went to Brazil and they bought a lot of soybean meal and oil, and what they let when I talk to people down there, they say soybean oil is scarce. We don't have sufficient, it's too expensive. So our margins are weak on the biodiesel side. And when we're buying the supply is scarce. And so in Brazil, supply has been so scarce, they had to lower the biodiesel blend rate for 2 months. They generally had a B12, they lowered it to B10. And that was for September and October. As of this week, people are saying, well, they're going to announce any day now what they're going to do for November and December. They don't know if it's going to be B10, B11, or back up to the normal B12. However, Brazil is so tight on soybean oil. For the first time in 2 or 3 years, they've had to go to Argentina to go buy product and import it into Brazil. So Brazil is extremely tight on the soybean oil. And so we're also seeing the crop outlook in the United States was cut, and that also puts underlying pressure on soybean oil. So for me, as I look at this, the one key market to watch is where is the soybean oil price going to go, and how long are the Chinese going to be in the market? So again, we are always available. We love to talk to subscribers and non-subscribers, really anybody in the market. So please reach out. You will get the slides, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Lila. And we have here in line a couple of questions for Paul Girard. Let me look those questions. Paul.
Yes.
This is Joe Bohannon from Ingevity and Marvin Donaldson from International Paper. And basically, the question is how RED 2.5 or RED 3 moving forward, what's going to be the impact on demand for crude tall oil?
Very good question. Crude tall oil is included in the Annex 9. And I'm going actually to use that opportunity to respond to the question I see in the chat. There is, at the moment, in the RED 2, no legal mechanism to remove a feedstock once it has been included in the Annex 9. That is enshrined in the law, and that's the system. So there is no possibility to remove tall oil. So the system that has been put in place when tall oil has been included in the Annex 9, basically, at the moment, if the situation does not change, nothing changes. However, there are certain stakeholders in Europe, mostly NGOs, but also some industries that are actually supportive of the idea to remove tall oil, or maybe not focusing on tall oil that much, but creating a mechanism in the directive to remove, that's right, to be able to remove feedstock. As I said, that process of reopening the legislation has just started. So at the moment, it isn't clear what the Commission will propose in initiating that new law proposal. But there will be voices, there will be positions to change the system in that direction. And if they succeed, in the sense where they would manage to get tall oil removed from the Annex 9, that would have an impact. The first question I got. Yes. If it don't succeed, then there would be, I believe, no specific impact for tall oil. But that is, I believe that we should consider all scenarios possible right now.
Okay.
Yep. That's my answer.
Thank you very much. And I have two questions from Nelson, also for you, Paul. Let me see. Nelson was what efforts will Europe make to influence countries such as China and India to adopt climate neutrality? That's the first question.
Well, Europe cannot force anyone to follow, obviously. I'm pretty sure some Europeans would like to be able to, but that's not how it works. There is, I could share more information with some participants afterwards if they're interested about the Green Deal, but there is an international dimension in the Green Deal. The European Union is committed to advertise, to promote the system they're trying to put in place at any international occasions they can have. Obviously, with the COVID at the moment, there are not such much international opportunities, but that's the plan. I think it has a sort of a soft power effect from Europe. When Europe decides some priorities, sometimes it is followed. The Chinese commitment to climate neutrality by 2060, as I announced less than 2 weeks ago, is the proof of that soft power existence. Mm-hmm. Will others follow? I cannot say, but there are some interest, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you. And is there any possibility that REACH will move away from a hazard-driven system to a more risk-based system? This is also Nelson asking.
So that is a completely different topic.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good for you. Well, since I'm working in CEFIC, obviously, I follow these discussions very closely as well, also for other sector groups I'm working with. Actually, in 2 weeks, normally in October 14, there will be at EU level the publication of a so-called Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. This strategy is going to announce quite some changes in how chemicals are regulated in Europe. The debate between hazard and risk-based systems is going to be an active part of that publication and the next steps to come afterwards. I don't believe that REACH will become hazard-based. There are people in favor of that, obviously, not CEFIC. We are still strong supporters of a risk-based approach in legislation for any aspect, including chemicals, obviously. There are supporters for the other way. I don't think we are going to move to an hazard-based system overall. However, what we see more and more is indeed the pressure on certain categories of chemical substances, like CMOs, like endocrine disruptors, etc., substances of very high concerns, in which some sort of a specific regime, which are more hazard-based, are being discussed. That has happened for pesticides, for example, in Europe, where the system is much more hazard-based than risk-based. So it is a case-by-case basis, I see, but this is for CEFIC at least concerning elements and concerning developments for sure.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much the other participant of this session 3, Marco Solin. Marco and Solin, sorry for the misunderstanding a couple of days ago with the time zones. That
no problem at all. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yes, and thank you, Lila. And well, we are going to start session 4, and session 4 is about our committees, about the Pine Chemical Association committees. And we are going to have a short report from each of the committees, and starting with John Mears from DRT. And he's the vice chair of the Environmental Health and Safety Committee, and is going to update us on the work of that committee. John.
Thank you, Alex. Everything coming across okay? We can see the presentation fine?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for our guests from around the globe. I want to start with a little story. there are many ways that we define ourselves in our lives. Some people count themselves as attractive or funny, others as intelligent or successful. Many people that I've come across in the chemical industry define themselves as lucky. I'm not referring to the kind of luck that you have where you win on your scratch-off ticket, or kind of luck where everything falls in your lap, get everything that you need in life. Not about the player who hoists the winning trophy or makes the winning shot. I'm talking about those people who have taken the shortcut, put themselves at risk to accomplish a task, and live to tell the tale. In the 14 years I've spent in the chemical health and safety profession, milestones have been celebrated, safety initiatives began, and cultures developed. Despite all the accolades, accomplishments, and successes, there have still been those occasions that I hear about one of my employees completing a task in a, shall we say, questionable manner. So how many times have you heard about someone in your organization having a close call? Someone gave you a shrug, a wink, or a raised eyebrow when asked how they managed to accomplish something. Oftentimes in our professional lives, and seemingly more often in the safety profession, we can find ourselves relying more on luck than compliant programs. But we have still managed to keep our processes online and pounds going out the door. So you might ask, is it really better to be lucky than good? The benefits of safety are inherently obvious to safety professionals. Cultivating a safe culture, implementing redundant layers of protection, defining roles and responsibilities of employees, developing and delivering comprehensive training, and providing the infrastructure for employees to be successful in our facility safety and health programs are commonplace for those involved in EHS. Still, many employees may wonder what they get out of being safe and continue to take risks. Every day, 14 workers die in U.S. workplaces. Women and men who go to work, never to return home to their family or loved ones. This isn't counting the 260 workers who die from occupational diseases every day. Chronic occupational diseases receive less attention. They're harder to detect, oftentimes not until years after they're exposed to the substances that we work with, and are often misdiagnosed or poorly tracked. In total, an average of 270 people die each day due to job injuries and illnesses in the U.S. That's just one country. In our 15-minute presentation today, 83 people will be injured in American workplaces. So ask yourself again, is it really better to be lucky than good? I share these thoughts and a few labor facts to present a few of the many reasons why I'm speaking here this morning, afternoon now. My name is John Myers. I'm the co-chairman of the EHS committee for the Pine Chemical Association. Thank you for allowing me to share what our committee is doing. And I count it as a privilege to share how we can help your safety professionals and your organization with your daily challenges and with your daily operations. So today we'll be discussing what makes the PCA committee work for you and your organization. We'll cover our mission statements, why we're here, how we work to protect your company, develop your EHS professionals' technical and functional capabilities, and wrap up with our beliefs and views on organizational leadership. So our mission statement, the Environmental Health and Safety Committee provides an avenue for Pine Chemical Association members to share approaches to common environmental safety and health issues. The committee identifies and shares environmental, safety and health information, including best practices, lessons learned, and current events for the purpose of reducing risk and advancing accident prevention programs at member operating facilities. So in a nutshell, we're going to talk about the lessons we've learned from a safety perspective. Not specifics, we're more looking at the critical details that could help another organization prevent the same incident that we've experienced at our site. We'll provide target EHS research. If you have a question about a specific regulation, we research it and share that with our members. Not legal advice, just share what we find. We develop EHS tools for specific challenges. If you need a specific procedure, we'll work as a team to assist in your efforts, come up with that best practice. We hold 2 in-person meetings and 4 teleconferences each year to stay abreast of current events. We ask our international members to keep us up to date on what's happening in their countries. And we improve process safety competency with continuous improvement topics. This will include operating procedures, training, isolating process hazards, and improving shift turnover. We are on a mission to improve process safety understanding for all of our members. While we're here, our ultimate mission is protect member companies' triple bottom line: people, our planet, and our profits. No cliches intended here. This committee is intent on raising awareness with EHS professionals and identifying process and occupational safety and regulatory gaps to eliminate adverse effects of bring business interruptions. Nobody knows better than this audience the importance of eliminating unexpected, unnecessary draws on our bottom line. Safety is not the absence of accidents, but the presence of defenses. We present talking points throughout the year to help your safety professionals better inform you on issues that can or will affect operations. Your safety professionals should inform you well ahead of the need to comply with a new directive or regulation to give you time to make informed decisions, and we help with that. At times in our committee, we can have over 200 years of combined experience in the room. This is available through this committee and allows us to help strengthen the background of the employees that are participating. We believe that a robust EHS system can be a distinct competitive advantage in global marketplaces. With a robust safety system comes improved morale, along with gaining buy-in and discretionary efforts from their team members. And we all know that nothing railroads your day like an adverse EHS event. Most of us have had the undesirable opportunity to experience at least one of these events in our career. As you know, there's one thing that really shakes out of all this, and that's that operational gaps can be identified a whole lot easier after it happens than before. And hopefully with enough input from our members, we can make that a little bit clearer as well. We work to improve innovation in regards to safe, reliable operations by discussing how we can improve skills and by sharing knowledge on what has worked and how we have successfully executed our own systems to those challenges. We publish 8 best work practices each year. These are selected by our members to help us identify our own gaps and how we can improve as an organization. We discuss common safety challenges to educate our members and improve your work culture. How can you close your gaps around common components to accidents or process safety? Our committee has the tools to get you the answers that you need. We are working to improve operations with highly skilled alert operators who are people that are controlling your processes to make sure they are charged to oversee a safe and reliable operation. We facilitate discussions and provide examples of what our industry's best-in-class operating procedures look like and how you can improve your own. We ask questions about the methods of failure that we are seeing in our industry in relation to incidents. What kind of incidents are we experiencing at our sites? And work to remedy those challenges. Some of the past examples that we've covered have been the national emphasis programs on process safety management, as well as the combustible dust standard. We discuss abnormal events and the importance of investigating and understanding these events to prevent reoccurrence. And we hold discussion and evaluation of the 12 vital operating skills that our operators and managers should master to sustain reliable operations. At our roundtables, we ask each other if each organization has these in place, what challenges were encountered during implementation, and how our process operations have improved since we have implemented them. EHS committee believes that safety performance is foundational to overall organizational performance. Excellence in safety establishes a performance platform that sets a benchmark for performance excellence across the entire company. And that a high-performing safety culture with high-performing employees will establish process safety enthusiasts who grow a passion for high quality and high performance with a high level of safety awareness. As I've been alluding to throughout this presentation, it's the upside of a strong safety presence is that it improves morale. You get buy-in, and it will continue to facilitate itself. The only thing of real importance that leaders do is create and manage culture. And that's really what our organization is here to do. Your EHS professionals assist operations leaders with creating and managing culture. If we fail, our people, our culture, our systems, those ensure that we fail safely. And to wrap up, this committee is a product of everyone who attends and is willing to participate. It's only as strong as its participants. The sharing of information and experiences that is specific to our industry, the pine chemical industry, as well as across the wider manufacturing spectrum, is key to our success. We actively seek and request that your EHS professionals attend and participate in our committee to bring the greatest level of benefits to all of our PCA members. Just consider this. For time investment of about an hour a month, you or your EHS professional gain the ability to be able to pick up the phone and call any number of experienced professionals in our industry to discuss a particular challenge to your facility. The networking alone, for me, has proven to be extremely valuable. And where else do you get that kind of return on your investment? So again, let this committee bring value to your operations with participation from your EHS professional. Wishing you all the best in 2021. Thank you.
All right. So, looks like we're getting things moving along. Alex, you're muted.
Sorry, I was talking here alone. No, I was John. Next EHS call is in October 8th. No, next Thursday.
That is correct.
I don't remember if it's. I think it's noon or 1 p.m. I don't remember exactly the time, but that's.
I think it's
the
1
next.
p.m.
1 p.m.
Yeah. Okay. Nelson. Now it's time for the Product Regulatory and Stewardship Committee. Nelson is going to talk about the activities of the committee, and then following that, Conrad Shannon is going to talk about a specific project we have running under that committee. Nelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. The Product Regulatory and Stewardship Committee is one of the oldest actually of all the PCA committees, and it's I think one of the most effective. As you can see, its purpose is to provide a forum through which the member companies can monitor, influence, and respond to legislative, environmental, chemical management, and regulatory issues relevant to the pine chemicals industry. We're more of a product involved committee as opposed to EHS, which is more of a plant-oriented committee. Although we're a small committee, we think we have had an influence out of all proportion to our size. See if I can get to the next.
You asked me to control your slides. I'm controlling your slides, Nelson, because you asked me.
All right, then I'll just tell you which slide to go to then. Here's what we actually do. We coordinate industry interactions with government regulators worldwide. We respond to regulatory programs, and we share the costs of testing if necessary. We lobby for regulations favorable to industry with other trade associations. We're a resource for our member companies. Awareness of new regulations is important to us. Advice to smaller companies, repository of key documents and studies. We meet and we share concerns and we take actions, and we provide technical help to our individual members on a limited basis. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please, Amanda? Or do you want me to control it here?
No, it's up. It says how we do it.
Okay, I've got it here. Well, let's see, we're missing a slide here, so let's go back here. Here's how we do it. We have 2 formal meetings per year, usually at Fernandina Beach, and we use GoToMeeting for those who can't always be present. And of course, we do all of our meetings currently with using GoToMeeting. And we have a couple of 1-hour teleconferences per year in between the meetings to update the actions. The newest thing that we do is we have involved a new website called Airtable Task Tracker, and it's proven to be very useful to us, a really neat way to update and summarize the issues, status, actions, and links to documents. And all members of the committee can have this Airtable on their desktop computers, and they are made aware of any new changes to any of these items that I've listed here in real time. Who's involved in this committee? You can see the list of the people down here. It makes a nice cross section of the companies within the PCA, not only in the United States, but in Europe and in other parts of the world as well, and in Brazil and so on. They're the ones that do the hard work. Now, the chairman, who is Conrad Shannon, is always from a member company, and I, as a staff member for PCA, try to take the heavy weight off the chairman's shoulders. So what I'd like to do next is to give you a quick overview of what we've been involved in and what we've accomplished this past year. As far as the USA is concerned, PCA continues to be involved in the implementation of the updated Toxic Substances Control Act as a member of the American Alliance for Innovation. This is an umbrella group of more than 200 trade organizations that multiplies the influence of any individual organization many times. We've been paying close attention to the EPA's prioritization process because it describes which chemicals are going to be evaluated as part of their process for risk assessment. And they have put initial set of chemicals into high priority and low priority lists. These have been finalized, and luckily for us, no pine chemicals have been included. The high priority lists will require much time and much expense to deal with the required risk assessments. The low priority lists won't require any at all. Let's turn to Canada, a little north of the border. PCA is a member of the Industry Coordinating Group for the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Participation in this group keeps us apprised of the regulatory issues in Canada and again multiplies our influence on the Canadian government. A lot of the things that the Canadian government does are looked at quite favorably by the US EPA, and so it's important that we keep track of these and influence them as we can. Now, we've responded to 4 draft screening risk assessments of pine chemicals which have appeared from Environment Canada and Health Canada. In 2018, PCA commented on the fatty acid and derivatives risk assessment, and it successfully, it seems, because Canada recently accepted all of our comments in formulating the final risk assessment document. In 2019, we commented extensively on the rosin and resins group, which included CTO. And in particular, we provided a significant document arguing that CTO should not be declared a CEPA toxic substance with all the restrictions in Canada and bad publicity worldwide. This year, we commented extensively on the monoterpenes group, especially because turpentine was proposed to be another CEPA toxic substance. We're still waiting to hear back from Canada on how they view those comments that we sent. In preparing these comments, we worked very closely with a number of other global organizations to provide support and data. We also provided significant input into the production of a document, a problem formulation white paper pertaining to alternatives assessment, which is the government effort in Canada to force the substitution of chemicals declared to be toxic. This document is going to be published and will be of value, we think, to regulators and to industry worldwide. And we have supported letters to the government of Canada concerning the unwarranted use of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act law to control plastic refuse and against an extensive rewrite of CEPA. As many of you probably know, the Canadian government has stated recently that they will use the chemical control law to control plastic garbage by declaring plastics to be a toxic substance. This is obviously of concern to both US and Canadian companies and to adhesive producers in particular. Now, for California, PCA continues to monitor and respond to actions by the state concerning pine chemicals through such organizations as the Green Chemistry Alliance. For one, the California Air Resources Board plans to revise their VOC regulations to eliminate the fragrance exemption and ratchet down the allowable VOCs in cleaners. This will obviously affect the use of pine oil. Probably not a good thing since we really do need more disinfectants, but that's California. We were previously stymied but in our efforts to get the Department of Toxic Substances in California to remove hydrogenated rosin derivatives from their candidate chemicals list, which subjects them to adverse customer responses. Reforms to the Department of Toxic Substances are coming, and an ombudsman position has been created that we feel may be more amenable to our position, and we intend to take up the cudgel once more. In Europe now, we continue to work with the Hydrocarbon and Rosin Resins Producers Association and with the H4R Consortium on issues impacting the pine chemicals industry. We're closely following the REACH initiative to register all polymers by 2022, and we've prepared a list of all the pine chemical polymers which are active in the USA. We receive regular updates from European issues from members of HARPA in Europe who are also on our PRS committee. We've been particularly interested in the direction that ECHA has been taking on risk assessments, ordering tests to be done on minor components of our substances, the most recent being rosin aldehydes present at only a few tenths of a %, and in the updating of REACH dossiers. This year, PCA commented extensively on an ECHA initiative to ban rosin and its derivatives from textiles and fur and leather because they have all been assumed incorrectly to be skin sensitizers. We were supported in this effort by the H4R Consortium in Europe, who submitted an extensive set of arguments very similar to ours. We haven't heard back from ECHA yet, but we look forward to seeing what they have to say about that. Next, Korea is a country that's set up what we call Korea REACH regulations. We've set up a subcommittee to monitor these regulations and support our member submissions to ensure that toxicity data which is submitted is consistent with that submitted to other regulatory organizations. And finally, we have a topic which has been fairly extensively discussed at committee meetings. It's the Global Regulatory Studies Library, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Conrad Shannon, who will discuss this in more detail. Thanks very much, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them after the presentations are all finished.
Thank you, Nelson. Conrad, take the lead.
All right, now Conrad, you're going to have to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Great. Great. I'd like to thank Nelson for the introduction and Alex and Greg for allowing me this opportunity to speak to the association. A little bit about the Global Resource Library. In 2017, DRT recognized the need for a TOX library to support our industry's response to the chemical control laws that were being promulgated worldwide at that time. We approached the PCA Regulatory Committee with a proposal to develop a library of toxicology studies of pine chemicals for use with regulators. The library is built on tox studies gathered to support REACH rosin registrations, but the scope is being broadened to worldwide coverage of all pine chemicals. I've got to emphasize, regulators will never have access to our library, only to specific studies for substances currently under evaluation. Those studies will remain the property of the original owner, and any use must have the data owner's approval prior to its release. And the data owner is compensated for the use of those studies. All right. Amanda, I'm not seeing the presentation.
Yeah, the presentation is up. It's just not advancing.
Okay.
I have it up on my screen if you'd like me to take it over. If not, you're showing your screen.
Okay, I can see it now.
Perfect.
Now we're good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. So what is the Global Resource Library? It's a database that contains existing toxicology studies of pine chemicals. And the reason why we need it, our association doesn't know of all the toxicology studies conducted on the various pine chemicals. This lack of knowledge presents numerous challenges to our industry, not the least of which are wasted resources, from manpower to money, used for studies on substances that may already have been tested. And if those existing studies are not known, potentially producing duplicate studies with different outcomes. Additionally, we're challenged to provide this information to regulators in a timely manner. Delays encourage regulators to make decisions based on their internally generated data, which is oftentimes based on worst case exposure scenarios. QSAR models of isolated components found in these UVCB substances are used instead of reviewing actual study outcomes, while isolating and purifying one component may overemphasize its toxicity within the UVCB substance matrix. Other components in UVCB substances can mitigate uptake or the impact of potentially toxic isolates, and encourages further restrictions or testing orders from authorities. The project's purpose is to create a comprehensive library of pine chemical studies. These studies are tied to numerous legal agreements for clearly defined purposes, such as REACH. Those agreements must be recognized and honored by the parties involved. Therefore, a mechanism for managing those existing agreements and for drafting the new agreements that do not conflict with any existing access rights is critical to the success of this project. So why do we need it? Without an inventory, we don't know what studies are available or their outcomes. We can't wait until authorities require this data to send out an industry-wide request for the information. It's often met with suspicion, and in some cases, businesses just fail to respond at all. Then authorities revert to their internal tools and worst-case scenarios. That almost always has a bad outcome for the substance being evaluated. Tox studies are expensive, resource-intensive, and time-consuming. Therefore, our industry needs a comprehensive library of existing studies on pine chemicals. In many cases, existing studies have been previously submitted to the European Chemicals Agency under REACH, to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under the HPV program, or to Environment Canada for their risk of management studies. Pine chemicals that were evaluated by any one of those agencies have had their toxicity determined. Therefore, duplications of those studies for other agencies' inquiries is a waste of limited industry resources. Furthermore, those new study outcomes may conflict with existing data, causing the authorities to request even more studies to corroborate or refute those previous findings. By allowing one set of studies to represent the same substance, our finite resources may be spread further to fill existing data gaps, thus reducing our collective costs. We simply need an inventory of existing studies and their outcomes. Global regulatory agencies' expectations are changing concerning the time allowed to submit safety data, and the costs for those studies are irrelevant to the authorities. These agencies are charged with protecting the public's health and safety, not ensuring our industry's profitability or sustainability. Authorities are demanding more studies on these substances to ensure they do not present unacceptable risk to workers or the public, and their demands go well beyond acute toxicology studies to include mutagenic, carcinogenic, and reproductive evaluations of our substances. Specific examples of these deeper dives into the toxicity of pine chemicals can be found in the European Union's Community Rolling Action Plan for monoglycerol ester of hydrogenated rosin, as well as the environmental fate of abiatinol. Additionally, ECHO required H4R to provide geno and reproductive toxicity studies for several rosin derivatives to complete their REACH lead registration dossiers. As EPA begins their risk evaluations for high priority substances, we expect similar requirements for data. If not readily available, EPA will use alternative assessment tools to determine which chemicals or groups of candidate chemicals to target for further action. Rosin is already labeled as a skin sensitizer in the European Union, and some rosin derivatives are being evaluated as possible endocrine disruptors. These classifications may elevate those substances to the SVHC inventory under REACH or the candidate chemicals list for prioritization under TSCA, neither of which we want to have happen. Being able to respond to these authorities with actual safety studies allows us to defend the safety of the substance in its entirety, rather than trying to defend dozens or even hundreds of individual components that may or may not be present in the final product. The new TSCA prioritization and risk assessment of chemicals, the alternative test methods to animal testing, and PBT concerns will drive demand for access to existing studies, as well as the development of more data to fill gaps in product knowledge. And the era of assumed safety for biologically sourced substances is over. UVCB substances are difficult to defend as more of their components are isolated and then computer modeled. It's very easy for authorities to run QSARs on UVCB isolates, identify a potential tox concern based on composition and structure, and then challenge our industry to prove that isolate's safety. So we've talked about proliferation of chemical regulations, and here are some examples of what the Regulatory Committee has been looking at. Korea and Taiwan have implemented REACH-like regulations, and they're calling for data sometime in late 2020 or probably 2021 with the pandemic right now. Russia is implementing their version of REACH, and they have developed their initial chemical inventory. China, Japan, and Australia are updating their chemical control laws as well. Colombia, Vietnam, Mexico, and Brazil are developing chemical inventories with the stated goal of evaluating and managing high-risk substances. So how do we protect our industry? Can we successfully respond to all these regulatory bodies as individual businesses, or should we pool our resources and cooperate? The countries listed on the screen are actively developing or further expanding their chemical control regulations. More will follow as they increase protections for the health and safety of their citizens and enter into new trade agreements with other countries. We would use the library to respond to legal inquiries concerning the safety of our pine chemicals. And we'll continue to work with and support HARPA as they respond to EU authorities concerning our mutual REACH obligations. However, HARPA and H4R will remain the only point of contact for inquiries from the European Chemicals Agency. Our intent is to pick up where H4R's role ends. Currently, H4R's scope is legally limited to the European Union. However, Turkey intends to join the EU, so it remains part of our ongoing discussions and is currently out of scope for both groups. And PCA's Regulatory Committee intends to try to cover the rest of the world. So the benefits for this project: it would allow us to share costs to and improve the efficiency of the pine chemicals industry. It'll reduce the likelihood of conflicting tox results from duplicate studies of the same substance. It will provide timely responses to global regulatory authorities, reduce the likelihood of regulatory decisions based solely on an authority's worst case scenario, as well as isolating and purifying substances and then doing QSAR modeling on those. We want them to assess the entire substance. We have the studies on those entire substances, and they should not be replaced by individual components that are isolated and purified. Other benefits include fewer animals being sacrificed. And Penman Consulting already has the database in place, and they manage the agreements and the costs associated with the existing studies in the database. So we've already got a leg up on this project. Finally, PCA and H4R members already share ownership over most of these studies. And so it should be a straightforward effort to try to get these things broadened to include the global regulatory library. The costs have been projected at year one implementation of 32 to 35,000 euros. And in years two, the price would wind up going down by half. The program would be administered through and managed by PCAI. And startup and supporting costs would be assessed from PCA members and paid to Penman Consulting by PCAA with the board of directors approval. The mechanism for the assessment is yet to be determined, but would be determined by the board of directors if they agree to support the project. So, sorry about that. In conclusion, PCA represents our industry outside the European Union, and we'd like your support in making our efforts more effective. It's in our mutual best interest to respond to regulators in a timely manner. It assures our industry's continued access to global markets. So we're asking, please allow us to lead a coordinated response to global authorities outside the EU. The library is a resource we'll need, and we will use it to protect our industry on a global scale. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you, Alex.
Very much. Of course, this is an issue that we have been bringing to the board, the PCA board, and we need to have a clear inventory and try to close this Gressel library. Now, Phil Hurd, our PCA testing committee staff, it's going to introduce us as the situation and the activities of the testing committee.
Okay, thank you, Alex, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of those who are still around. I have the luxury of having the last presentation on the of the day, so thank you all for hanging in there with me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Phil Hurd. I am the PCA staff support for the testing committee, the PCA testing committee. And our committee is responsible for maintaining and writing new test methods that impact the pine chemicals industry. And we are principally made up of two groups. The ASTM subcommittee, DO1, which is the Pine Chemicals and Hydrocarbon Resins Committee, subcommittee of DO1, and also the ISO committee, the ISO TC35 WG5 working group, which is part of the coatings group of the ISO committee. And it includes the naval stores industry. The third group that we participate in is all of the members of our PCA committee that work in the tall oil plants and use the PCA test methods for part of the of their analysis for doing their work in the tall oil plants. So we have basically three areas of responsibility: the ASTM test methods, the ISO test methods, and the PCA test methods. I have shown you here that the membership of our subcommittee, which is chaired by Robert McKinley from DRT, and we have members from each one of our producing companies, our production facilities, fractionators. We currently are lacking a member from Eastman Chemicals, and we do need a member that would represent Eastman on our committee. We also have outside non-industry members who use the ASTM test methods for much of their work from outside labs and other industries, such as tintometer and other labs that do work involving the use of tall oil. Our ISO membership is also made up of the pine chemicals industry mainly in Europe, and we have mostly members from producers in Europe, as well as some industry-related professionals as well. So you can see the membership here. I also serve as the convener for the ISO committee. The scope of our testing group, as I mentioned, is to maintain and update our existing standards, develop new and improved methods as they are needed by the industry. And one of our goals over the last few years has been to work towards harmonized global standard test methods that are being used around the world. And in speaking of trying to harmonize test methods, over the last couple of years, we have spent quite a bit of time on two areas of harmonization. One of those being the softening point of rosin and rosin resins, and the other is the color of rosin, mainly in solution. So the ISO committee in Europe took the lead on looking at the softening point ISO test method, conducted several round-robin experiments, and collected the data, and we have included a third portion of the ISO test method for softening point, which includes the use of the Mettler softening point for rosin resin derivatives without a ball. So that is the test method that will be included as part of the ISO test method. In the US, the ASTM committee has led the effort to look at the color of rosin in solution. We have conducted a round-robin study, one initial round-robin study, including gum rosin, wood rosin, and tall oil rosin, and a rosin resin derivative in our testing. The results of that initial round of testing found that our method, sample preparation method, was a little unclear. So we voted to revise that sample preparation method and to conduct a second testing or round-robin testing. And of course, right then the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Most of the laboratories around the world closed down. People had to go home and quarantine themselves. So just now, some of the labs are getting back up to speed. So we'll want to reinitiate those efforts to finish up that round-robin testing early in 2021. The PCA test methods, we are currently continuing to revise the PCA test methods for accuracy and make sure they are updated. And once we do that, we publish those to the PCA website. So our goals for 2021 are to continue to review the PCA test methods and revise those and publish them to the PCA website. Complete the round-robin testing for the color of rosin in solution, and to finalize and publish the latest ISO test method for the softening point of rosin and rosin resins. And I think that concludes my presentation. Yeah, so to sum up, we want to continue to maintain our existing ASTM methods and ISO test methods, and to develop new test methods if the needs of the industry change.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you very much, John, Nelson, and Conrad. This has been a marathon, and we finished just 5 minutes before the hour, no? We didn't have time for a coffee break in between.
Yep.
But it looks like we had a very interesting set of participants and panelists. We have in line a couple of projects that we are working that has to be do with the Pine Chemicals book online, and we are working also on the Pine Chemicals directly online project. Amanda is going to circle. Amanda.
Yes.
Yes, you are going to circle questionnaire to our participants.
Yes. So as everyone closes out the webinar today, you should receive a brief survey on your screen. If you could complete that, that will definitely help us. In addition, all of the updated presentations will be sent out probably later today or tomorrow, along with some links once we have the video edited and up on the channel, so that you can view any presentations you may have missed or go back and review information that was shared as part of this event.
Well, and thank you for all the time that Amanda and Wendy put in organizing this virtual conference. Our first test it looked like was successful. Greg, I don't know if you want to give a last thought about this meeting.
You know, I would say, considering this was the first go round, I thought this worked very, very well. And again, I kind of judge it by gauging the number of attendants and how many people stay online with us. And then typically you'll have people fade off as the day goes on, but we've got good attendance. You know, you've got 90 people still going here. It's tough to go 4 straight hours, but I think certainly there's some good beneficial information for all the members, and just encourage everybody to stay in touch with the PCA and use it as a resource going forward.
Well, thank you, Greg, and we are going to keep this contact with our members and keep moving in these very particular times. Amanda, any thought to close this?
No, we're going to have this up for just a few minutes as everyone is getting off the webinar. There may have been a few questions that were asked that people left before they had a chance to be answered. So we'll try and circulate those over to the speaker so that we can have those appropriately answered as well. They've already been specified for Murphy. So we'll make sure that we try and get as many questions answered. And thank you so very much for everyone's patience. We've definitely had to move into a new realm of technology. So thanks for your patience with all of us as we got this first conference under our belt, and we'll see what we can provide to you all moving forward with updates for the industry.
And thank you, Tony, for the patient and with all the questions coming in and everything.
My pleasure, Alex. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all, and please keep healthy and safe.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Alex.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Alex, we will touch base with you in just a bit, okay?
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.